Tonight, we will explore the quiet history of how things get their value. We will look at the simple, slow-moving ideas behind prices and why the cost of everyday things like a loaf of bread has shifted throughout time. If you find these stories restful, you might consider subscribing to the channel. We always enjoy seeing where our listeners are tuning in from, so feel free to leave a comment with your city or country. Long ago, in a world without coins or paper money, the exchange of goods was a very direct and personal process. Imagine a small village, where one person is a baker, and another is a farmer who grows wheat. The baker needs wheat to make bread, and the farmer needs bread to eat. They could simply trade. The farmer gives the baker a sack of wheat, and in return the baker gives the farmer several loaves of bread. This system, known as bartering, worked well when two people each had something the other wanted at that exact moment. But this system depended on a bit of luck. What if the farmer needed a new pair of shoes, but the village shoemaker didn't need any wheat? The farmer would have to find someone who had something the shoemaker wanted, and then trade with them first. It could become a complicated chain of exchanges just to get one simple item. This made daily life less predictable. A clear and consistent way to measure value was needed. To solve this, communities began to agree on a single, common item to use for trade. It might be something everyone found useful, like salt, or something durable and easy to carry, like certain types of seashells. In a farming community, it was often grain. A bushel of wheat became a standard unit of value. The shoemaker might sell a pair of shoes for 10 bushels of wheat. He could then use that wheat to buy bread from the baker, or cloth from the weaver. The grain acted as an intermediary, a placeholder for value that everyone trusted. It was a step towards a more stable system of exchange. This worked better, but carrying around bushels of grain was not always practical. It was heavy, and it could spoil over time. The next step in this slow evolution was the introduction of metal. Metals like copper, silver, and gold were durable. They did not spoil, and they could be divided into very small pieces without losing their worth. Local leaders or merchants began to weigh out small amounts of metal for transactions. To make this process even simpler and more trustworthy, they started stamping the metal pieces with a seal. This stamp was a guarantee of the metal's weight and purity. These were the first coins. Now the farmer could sell his entire harvest for a pouch of small silver coins. With these coins, he could easily buy shoes, bread, or anything else he needed. Each item had a price, a certain number of coins. A loaf of bread might cost 1 copper coin. A pair of shoes might cost 5 silver coins. The value of things became clearer, more stable, and easier to understand for everyone in the village. The system of prices was born from this need for a simple, shared language of value. So, we have seen a slow journey from direct trading of goods to using a common item like grain, and finally to the creation of small, metal coins. Each coin represented a certain amount of value, making it simpler for people to buy and sell the things they needed for daily life. The coins on the wooden table sit beside the bread they might have once purchased. Each one is a small marker of a day's work, a quiet promise of value, resting until it is needed again. This system brought a sense of order and predictability to the gentle rhythm of the everyday. In the earliest of communities, long before the first coin was ever struck, the world of trade was a quiet and personal one. It was a system built not on numbers but on needs and relationships. This was the time of barter, the simple, direct exchange of one good or service for another. Life was centered around the village, the family, and the seasons. Everyone had a skill, a craft, or a piece of land that produced something of value. Imagine a weaver who spends her days at a loom, creating strong, warm cloth from wool. She has more cloth than her family needs. A few homes away, a fisherman rises before the sun and returns with a net full of fish. He has more than he can eat. The weaver needs food for her family's evening meal, and the fisherman needs a new cloak to shield him from the cold sea air. They might meet in the village square, or perhaps one would simply visit the other's home. The weaver would offer a length of her cloth, and the fisherman would offer a string of his best fish. They would look at the items, feel the quality of the cloth, see the freshness of the fish, and agree to a trade. No money would change hands, only the goods themselves. This system worked beautifully when two people happened to have what the other desired. This is sometimes called a double coincidence of wants. It is a moment of perfect alignment, where needs and surpluses match exactly. For many daily exchanges in a small, stable community, this was enough. People knew their neighbors and their needs. The baker knew the blacksmith needed bread, and the blacksmith knew the baker would eventually need a new hook for his oven door. These exchanges were the gentle, predictable rhythm of life. However, this system had its limits. What if the fisherman did not need any cloth? What if he already had a warm cloak, and instead needed his fishing net mended? The weaver, skilled at her loom, might not know how to mend nets. In this case, a direct trade was not possible. The fisherman would have to keep his fish, and the weaver would have to find someone else who had food and also wanted cloth. This could make getting what one needed a more complicated task, a chain of searching and asking. In these close-knit societies, the solution was often found in community and trust. The exchange did not always have to be immediate. The weaver might give the cloth to the fisherman with the understanding that he would repay her later, perhaps with fish from a future catch, or by helping her fix her roof. This was a system of reciprocal obligation, a form of community memory, where favors were given and returned over time. It was less of a transaction, and more of a shared understanding that everyone contributed and everyone received. So we can see that the first systems of trade were deeply personal. They were based on the direct exchange of goods, a process called bartering, which relied on both people having what the other needed at the same time. When that wasn't possible, trade relied on the quiet trust and shared memory within a small community. The fisherman's boat rests on the shore, its net drying in the evening sun. Inside the weaver's home, the exchanged fish is cooking over a warm fire. In this simple world, value was tangible, something you could hold, wear, or eat, a direct result of a day's labor and a neighbor's trust. As the practice of direct bartering became cumbersome, a new idea quietly took hold in communities around the world. Instead of trying to find a perfect match for every trade, people began to use an intermediary item. This was the birth of commodity money, where a common, useful object became the standard for measuring value. The item chosen was always something that everyone in the community found intrinsically valuable. In some places, especially far from the sea, that item was salt. Salt was essential for preserving food and adding flavor, making it a constant necessity. A person might mine or harvest large blocks of salt. When they needed to buy something like a clay pot or a tool, they would not trade a piece of cloth or a bag of grain. Instead, they would carefully break off a piece of salt from their block and offer that as payment. The potter would accept the salt, knowing they could use it for their own food or trade it later for something else they needed. The salt block itself became a store of value, and a small piece of it became a unit of exchange. In other parts of the world, particularly along coastal regions, certain types of seashells were used. Cowrie shells, with their smooth, durable, and uniform shapes, were a popular choice. They were small and light, making them easy to carry in a pouch. They were also difficult to forge, and their supply was naturally limited, which helped them hold their value. A farmer could sell a basket of yams for a handful of cowrie shells. He could then take those same shells to the market and use them to buy fish, or beads, or a woven mat. The shells had no purpose other than their beauty and their agreed-upon role as money. They were a simple, elegant solution to the problem of trade. In pastoral societies, where life revolved around herding, livestock often served as the measure of wealth. A person's standing could be understood by the size of their herd of cattle, goats, or sheep. Large, important transactions, like arranging a marriage or buying a parcel of land, might be conducted in terms of a certain number of cows. While livestock was certainly valuable, it was not an ideal form of money for everyday use. A cow was not easily divisible. One cannot pay for a loaf of bread with a small piece of a living animal. They were also not very portable. This system worked for significant exchanges, but was less practical for the small transactions of daily life. These early forms of money, salt, shells, and livestock, were all physical goods with their own inherent use or value. They were chosen because they were durable, somewhat portable, and widely accepted by everyone in a given area. This made the process of buying and selling much simpler than direct bartering. So we have seen how communities moved beyond simple barter by choosing a single, valued commodity to act as money, whether it was a piece of salt, a smooth shell, or a farm animal. This common item made the gentle rhythm of trade more fluid and predictable. A handful of polished cowrie shells rests on a wooden table, their surfaces gleaming in the low light. Each one is a silent token of a past exchange, a simple promise of value, held and trusted by the hands that passed them on. While commodity money like salt and shells made trade simpler, it still had its own quiet challenges. Salt could crumble or get damp. Shells could break. Livestock was not easily divided. As trade routes expanded and towns grew into cities, a more durable and reliable form of value was needed. This led people to the metals buried deep within the earth: copper, silver, and gold. Metal had many advantages. It did not spoil or decay. It could be melted and reformed. Most importantly, it could be divided into very small pieces or combined into large ones without losing its fundamental worth. At first, metal was used in a very basic way. A merchant might carry a pouch of silver dust or a collection of small, rough copper nuggets. When it came time to make a purchase, the merchant would pour some of the metal onto a small, delicate set of scales. The shopkeeper would place a stone weight on the other side of the scale, and they would carefully adjust the amount of metal until the two sides were balanced. This was a slow, deliberate process, requiring precision and trust. For every single transaction, no matter how small, the scales had to come out. There was also the constant question of purity. Was the silver truly pure, or had it been mixed with a less valuable metal? This uncertainty meant that traders had to be experts, able to judge the quality of the metal by its color, feel, and weight. It made commerce a careful and sometimes difficult practice, especially for ordinary people who were not skilled in metallurgy. A new step was needed to make the process more reliable for everyone. The solution came in the form of standardization. Instead of using loose dust and random nuggets, artisans and rulers began to cast metal into standardized shapes of a specific weight. These could be small bars, rings, or even tiny axe heads. These objects, often called ingots, were a significant step forward. A merchant could now trade with rings of silver that were all meant to be the same weight. It was faster than weighing out dust for every purchase. However, the question of purity and exact weight still remained. To solve this final problem, a mark of guarantee was added. A trusted authority, perhaps a powerful merchant guild, a temple, or a local king, would place their official stamp onto the ingot. This stamp was a promise. It certified that the piece of metal was a specific weight and a specific purity. Now, a trader could accept the stamped silver bar without needing to bring out his scales or test the metal. He trusted the stamp. This simple act of stamping a piece of metal transformed it from a mere commodity into a true instrument of commerce. It made trade faster, safer, and accessible to more people. In this way, the use of metal evolved from raw, unformed chunks to standardized, stamped ingots. This slow progression was driven by the simple need for a trustworthy and convenient way to exchange value, making daily life and long-distance trade more predictable and calm. A small, stamped bar of bronze rests in the palm of a hand. Its edges are worn smooth from years of use, the official mark faded but still visible. It is a solid, quiet object, a physical representation of trust that allowed the flow of goods to move more freely along ancient roads. The journey from stamped metal bars to something more convenient was a slow and natural one. While ingots were a great improvement, they were often large and best suited for significant transactions. For the small purchases of daily life, a loaf of bread, a measure of olive oil, a smaller, more uniform token of value was needed. This next quiet step in the story of money took place in a kingdom called Lydia, in a part of the world we now know as Turkey. The rivers of Lydia were special. As they flowed from the mountains, they carried with them a pale yellow metal, a natural mixture of gold and silver. This alloy was called electrum. For the Lydians, this metal was readily available and already considered precious. They recognized its potential to create a better system for their bustling markets and trade routes. The idea was simple: to take this valuable metal and form it into small, consistent pieces that everyone could recognize and trust. The process of creating these first coins was a work of careful craftsmanship. A small, measured amount of electrum was heated until it was soft. This warm glob of metal was then placed on a sturdy surface, perhaps a bronze anvil, which had a design carved into it. This design was the official seal of the Lydian king, often the head of a lion. On top of the electrum, a simple tool called a punch was placed. A craftsman would then strike the punch firmly with a hammer. This single, swift action pressed the soft metal into the carving below, permanently impressing the king's seal onto one side. The result was not a perfectly round disc like the coins we know today. It was a small, bean-shaped piece of metal, a little irregular and thick. On its face was the clear image of the lion, the guarantee of the king. On the back was the rough, square indentation left by the punch used to strike it. Though humble in appearance, this was a profound innovation. Each of these small electrum pieces was intended to be a standard weight. They were, in effect, the world's first coins. The true significance of this invention was its effect on everyday life. The royal stamp was a promise that the coin contained a certain amount of precious metal. People no longer needed to carry scales to the market to weigh out silver dust or scrape pieces from an ingot. Instead, they could simply count out a number of these new Lydian coins. A price could be set at 3 coins for a pair of sandals, or 1 coin for a jar of wine. Commerce became quicker, more efficient, and more accessible to everyone. It introduced a new level of predictability and ease to the simple act of buying and selling. So in the ancient kingdom of Lydia, a naturally occurring metal called electrum was used to create small, standardized pieces. By stamping each piece with an official seal, the Lydians created the first coins, transforming trade from a process of weighing to one of simple counting. In the quiet of a workshop, a newly struck electrum coin cools on a stone ledge. The image of the lion is sharp and clear, a silent promise of value, ready for the gentle flow of the marketplace at dawn. The idea of coinage, so elegantly simple, did not remain in Lydia for long. Like a seed carried on the wind, it traveled across the Aegean Sea to the many Greek city-states. Each city began to mint its own coins, stamping them with their own unique symbols: a turtle for Aegina, a winged horse for Corinth. Among these, one coin would become particularly renowned for its quality and trustworthiness: the silver drachma of Athens. Athens was a bustling center of culture and commerce, and it was fortunate to have a nearby source of exceptionally pure silver in the mines of Laurion. The city took great care in its minting process. The silver was refined to a high standard, and the coins were produced with a consistent weight and thickness. This dedication to quality was the foundation of their value. Over time, people throughout the ancient world came to know that an Athenian coin was exactly what it claimed to be. The most famous of these coins was the tetradrachm, a thick silver coin worth 4 drachmas. It is often called the Athenian owl. On one side, it featured the head of the goddess Athena, the city's protector, wearing a crested helmet. Her expression is calm and steady. On the other side was her sacred symbol, an owl with large, round eyes. Beside the owl was a small olive sprig, a symbol of peace and a nod to the city's famous olive groves, along with the first 3 letters of the city's name in Greek: Alpha, Theta, Epsilon. The design was not just decorative. It was a seal of quality. The image of Athena and her owl was Athens, promised that the coin was made of pure silver and was of the proper weight. This promise was so reliable that the Athenian owl became what we might call an international currency. A merchant from Egypt or a grain trader on the shores of the Black Sea would happily accept these coins in payment. They did not need to weigh them or test the silver. They recognized the familiar owl and knew its value was true. This widespread trust had a profound effect on trade. It made long-distance commerce much simpler and more predictable. A ship's captain could leave Athens with a chest of silver owls and confidently purchase goods in any port he visited. The coin's stability helped the Athenian economy to flourish and made the city a central hub of the Mediterranean world. It provided a common language of value that connected distant peoples, all built on the simple foundation of a consistently made piece of silver. In essence, the Athenian owl became a trusted standard because of its high-quality silver and the careful, consistent way it was made. This reliability allowed it to travel far beyond the city walls, helping to facilitate a calm and orderly flow of trade across the sea. An ancient silver coin rests on a dark, weathered piece of wood. The calm face of Athena and the wise owl are still visible after more than 2,000 years. It is a small, quiet object, a lasting symbol of a time when consistency and trust were carefully minted into metal. As the influence of the Greek city-states gave way to the quiet, steady rise of Rome, so too did their coinage. The Romans were practical builders and administrators, and they understood the need for a single, reliable currency to hold their vast and growing territories together. From this need came one of history's most enduring coins, the silver denarius. For centuries, this small coin would be the backbone of the Roman economy, a tool of empire as much as a tool of trade. The denarius was a modest object, a silver disc small enough to fit comfortably between the thumb and forefinger. In the early days of the Roman Republic, its design was simple, often featuring the goddess Roma on one side and a mythological scene on the other. As Rome transitioned into an empire, the coins began to bear the portraits of the ruling emperors. This was a quiet but significant change. It meant that a person holding a denarius in a distant province, like Britain or Syria, would carry a small image of the emperor in their pouch, a constant, tangible reminder of Rome's authority. The true strength of the denarius was its consistency. For a very long period, it was minted from a high percentage of pure silver. This reliability was the bedrock of the imperial economy. The legions were paid in denarii. Taxes were collected in denarii. A farmer selling his grain in the markets of North Africa would receive denarii. And with those same coins, he could purchase wine imported from Gaul or pottery from Italy. The coin created a vast, unified economic space. It allowed goods and services to flow smoothly across thousands of miles, from the cold forests of Germania to the warm deserts of Egypt. Imagine a Roman centurion retiring after his years of service. He is paid his final wages, a heavy purse of silver denarii. He might use these coins to buy a small plot of land in a peaceful corner of the empire. The person who sells him the land then uses those same coins to pay the stonemason who builds his new house. The stonemason, in turn, uses a denarius to buy bread for his family's dinner. The coin moves from hand to hand, a quiet enabler of daily life. Its value understood and accepted by all. This predictability brought a deep sense of order and stability to the everyday lives of millions of people. We see then that the Roman denarius was more than just money. It was a small, silver instrument of unity and stability, a coin whose reliable silver content and widespread acceptance helped to hold a vast and diverse empire together for centuries. A single denarius rests on a piece of dark, worn leather. The silver has a soft sheen, and the emperor's profile, though smoothed by time and touch, is still clear. It is a silent witness to countless simple transactions, a small piece of a system that brought a predictable rhythm to a very large world. To supply a vast empire with a consistent currency, the Romans developed a methodical and widespread system of coin production. The main mint was in Rome itself, a busy workshop at the heart of the empire. But to pay legions stationed on distant frontiers, and to facilitate trade in faraway provinces, it was not enough to mint all coins in one place. So a network of official imperial mints was established in major cities across the Roman world, from Gaul to Syria. The process within each of these mints, or officinae, followed a calm and predictable routine. It began with the raw materials, large ingots of silver, gold, or bronze would arrive, carefully weighed and recorded. These bars were then broken down and melted in crucibles over a hot furnace. The air in the workshop would be filled with the warmth of the fire and the low hum of activity. Once the metal was molten, it was used to create the coin blanks, which were called flans. This was done in one of two ways. Sometimes, the liquid metal was poured into small, disc-shaped molds made of clay or stone, creating a row of rough circles. Other times, the metal was cast into a flat sheet, which was then allowed to cool. Workers would then take sharp tools and cut or punch out circular blanks from this sheet. Either way, the result was a collection of small, plain metal discs, each one weighed to ensure it met the required standard. While this was happening, another group of highly skilled artisans was at work. These were the die engravers. Using fine, sharp tools, they would meticulously carve the coin designs into the faces of two small, hardened bronze or iron cylinders. These were the dies. One die, the anvil die, would feature the design for the reverse of the coin, perhaps an image of a goddess or a military standard. It was set firmly into a heavy workbench. The other, the punch die, would have the obverse design, usually the emperor's portrait. When the blanks and dies were ready, the final, crucial step of striking could begin. The workshop would echo with the steady, rhythmic sound of hammers. A worker, the asterisk suppostor, would take a heated coin blank, which made the metal softer and easier to stamp, and place it carefully on the anvil die. Another worker would then hold the punch die squarely on top of the blank. A third worker, the asterisk malleator, would swing a heavy hammer and strike the top of the punch die with a single powerful blow. In that instant, the immense pressure would force the soft metal of the blank to fill every tiny detail of the carved dies, permanently impressing the images onto both sides. This entire process was done by hand, a quiet collaboration of skilled labor. Because each coin was struck individually, no two were ever perfectly identical. Some might be slightly off-center, or the force of the hammer blow might vary. This gives each Roman coin a unique, handmade character. In this way, the Roman mints operated as a network of orderly workshops. Through the methodical, manual process of melting, casting, engraving, and striking, they transformed raw metal into the millions of coins that powered the daily life of the empire. A set of bronze dies rests on a wooden shelf as the workshop grows quiet for the evening. The engraved face of an emperor is carved in reverse, waiting for the morning, when the rhythmic work of turning metal into money will begin once more. To manage an economy that stretched across an entire continent, the Roman system of money was not based on a single coin, but on a carefully structured family of coins made from different metals. This created a tiered system, where each metal, gold, silver, and bronze, had its own distinct role in the gentle flow of daily commerce. It was a clear and predictable arrangement that everyone, from a senator in Rome to a farmer in Gaul, could understand. At the very top of this system was the gold coin, the aureus. It was a heavy, valuable piece, not intended for everyday shopping. The aureus was the coin of significant wealth and large-scale transactions. One might use a pouch of aurea to purchase a country villa, to pay the salary of a high-ranking official, or for a merchant to buy an entire shipment of silk from the East. For most people, seeing a gold aureus, let alone spending one, would have been a rare event. It was a store of substantial value, a quiet symbol of power and permanence. The true workhorse of the Roman economy was the silver denarius. This was the coin that paid the soldiers, the coin in which taxes were often calculated, and the standard unit of value for most significant goods and services. A denarius held real purchasing power. It might represent a skilled laborer's wage for a day or two. With a few denarii, a person could buy a good quality tunic, a sturdy farming tool, or enough grain to feed a family for a couple of weeks. The denarius was the solid, reliable middle ground of the monetary system. For the small daily transactions in the bustling markets, there were the bronze and copper coins. The largest of these was the sestertius, a broad bronze coin. Below it were smaller denominations like the dupondius and the as. These were the coins of the people. Their weight in a pouch was the sound of everyday life. With these bronze and copper coins, one could buy a loaf of bread, a cup of wine at a tavern, some vegetables from a market stall, or entry to the public baths. They were the small change that kept the local economy moving in its steady, predictable rhythm. The entire system was held together by a stable set of relationships. For a long and stable period, one gold aureus was equal in value to 25 silver denarii. One silver denarius, in turn, was worth 4 bronze sestertii, and a sestertius was worth 4 copper asses. This made calculations straightforward. This clear, 3-tiered structure, based on the intrinsic value of the metals themselves, created a sense of order and reliability that lasted for centuries. So we see that the Roman currency was a system of different metals for different purposes. Gold was for great wealth, silver was for substantial purchases, and bronze was for the small everyday needs of life, all connected in a simple fixed relationship. On a simple wooden table, the 3 types of coins lie side by side. The soft yellow gleam of a single aureus, the bright shine of a few silver denarii, and the dark, earthy tones of a handful of bronze sestertii. Together, they form a quiet map of an entire economy, from the grandest of transactions to the simplest purchase of bread. With a standardized set of coins in circulation, the rhythm of daily life and the reach of trade were quietly transformed. This system of metal money, with its clear values, provided a common language that made commerce, both small and large, a much calmer and more predictable affair. It brought a new sense of order to the world. In the morning markets of a Roman town, the benefits were clear and tangible. A person could leave their home with a small leather pouch containing a few bronze coins and be confident they could purchase what they needed for the day. At the baker's stall, a warm loaf of bread would have a set price, perhaps 1 or 2 copper asses. There was no need for haggling over the value of the payment, only a simple counting of coins from one hand to another. The transaction was over in moments, a smooth and effortless exchange. The baker, in turn, could use those same coins to buy flour from a farmer, without worrying about whether the farmer needed bread that day. The coins acted as a universal token of value. This simplicity extended to all parts of the market. A few larger bronze sestertii could purchase a good clay amphora of wine, or a basket of fresh fish from a fisherman. This predictability meant that people could plan. They knew the value of their labor, and they knew the cost of the goods they needed. It removed a layer of uncertainty from everyday existence, allowing the gentle hum of the community to proceed without the constant friction of bartering. On a much larger scale, this same system of trusted coinage made long-distance commerce possible. Imagine a merchant in the port of Ostia, near Rome, loading his ship with barrels of olive oil. His journey was made possible not just by his sturdy ship and the favorable winds, but by the small silver coins he would be paid with. He could sail to a distant port like Alexandria in Egypt, sell his oil for silver denarii, and be certain of their value. With that pouch of denarii, he did not need to immediately find goods to trade for his oil. The coins were a portable and stable store of that value. He could then travel to another part of the city and use the same denarii to purchase goods unique to that region, such as fine linen, glass, or papyrus scrolls. The emperor's portrait on each coin was a familiar sight in every marketplace, a guarantee of worth that was understood from Britain to Persia. A denarius, minted in Gaul, held the same trusted value in a Syrian bazaar. In this way, the Roman coin system worked on 2 distinct levels. The small bronze coins facilitated the calm, predictable exchanges of daily life within a town, while the silver coins stitched to the distant corners of the empire into a single, flowing marketplace. In the captain's cabin of a merchant ship, a wooden box of coins sits closed, as the vessel rests in the quiet of the harbor. The metal inside represents the value of a long journey, a tangible result of the day's work. The ship rocks gently on the tide, waiting for the morning and the next port of call. As the use of coins became more common, a new quiet need arose: a safe place to keep them. An individual farmer or merchant might accumulate a small surplus of silver denarii, more than they needed for immediate use. Keeping a large sum of money in a simple wooden chest at home was not always secure. The answer, in many ancient societies from Greece to Mesopotamia, was not a building designed for finance, but one designed for worship: the temple. Temples were often the most secure and permanent structures in any city. They were built with sturdy stone walls, heavy doors, and were usually located in a central, visible place. More than that, they were always occupied, with a constant presence of priests and attendants. This physical security made them a logical choice for safeguarding valuables. But the most powerful protection was not physical, but spiritual. Temples were sacred ground. To steal from a temple was not just a crime against a person, but an offense against the gods. This created a deep cultural deterrent that was often more powerful than any lock or guard. The process of making a deposit was a calm and orderly one. A wealthy merchant, perhaps before setting out on a long and uncertain sea voyage, would bring a sealed chest or a heavy pouch of coins to the city's main temple. He would be met by a priest or a temple scribe. In a quiet side chamber, the contents would be carefully counted and weighed. A record of the deposit would be made, perhaps inscribed onto a clay tablet or written on a piece of papyrus. One copy would be kept in the temple's archives, and another given to the merchant as a receipt. The merchant's wealth would then be placed in a secure inner treasury, a cool, stone-lined room deep within the temple complex, alongside the temple's own treasures and the deposits of other citizens. The merchant could now travel with the peace of mind that his wealth was protected. Upon his safe return, he could present his receipt to the temple priests and withdraw his funds. For this service, the temple might charge a small fee, or the depositor might simply make a voluntary offering to the gods as a sign of gratitude. Over time, some temples began to offer another service. They realized that the large amounts of gold, silver, and grain sitting in their vaults could be put to use. They could lend out a portion of these deposits to others who needed capital, charging interest and creating an early, simple form of a banking system. Thus, the ancient temple became an early form of bank. Its combination of physical strength and its sacred, trusted status made it the most logical and secure place for individuals to store their valuable assets, from coins to grain. The great bronze doors of the temple are closed for the night. The moonlight casts long shadows across the stone courtyard. Inside, in the quiet darkness of the treasury, the deposited coins and grain rest safely. They are protected not just by stone and locks, but by a shared belief, a quiet agreement that this place was beyond the reach of ordinary life. Once people had a safe place to store their surplus wealth, another quiet innovation began to take shape. This was the idea of credit, a system built on the simple act of lending and borrowing. It was a natural next step, born from the predictable needs and rhythms of life, especially in the ancient agricultural societies of Mesopotamia. Imagine a farmer whose grain stores are empty just before the planting season. He has land, he has skill, and he has the promise of a future harvest, but he does not have the seed he needs right now. At the same time, the local temple or a wealthy landowner has storehouses filled with grain, far more than they need for their own use. The farmer could approach the temple scribe and ask for a loan of seed. This was not seen as a request for a handout, but as a practical business arrangement. The process was formal and carefully documented. The scribe would take a piece of soft clay and a stylus. He would record the farmer's name, the amount of grain being borrowed, and the date. He would also record the terms of repayment. The farmer would agree to return the same amount of grain after the harvest, plus a little extra. This additional amount, the interest, was the fee for using the temple's resources. It was a share in the future success of the harvest that the loan made possible. Once the terms were inscribed, the clay tablet would be dried in the sun, becoming a permanent, binding record of the agreement. This simple object, a small rectangle of hardened earth, was a physical representation of trust and obligation. A similar practice evolved in ancient Greece, but it was adapted for a different kind of economy, one based on sea trade. A ship owner might want to undertake a long trading voyage, but lacks the silver coins to purchase a cargo of wine or olive oil to sell abroad. He could seek a maritime loan. This was a more complex arrangement, as a voyage at sea carried significant risks. Storms could sink a ship, or pirates could seize the cargo. Because of this higher risk, the interest on a maritime loan was typically higher than on an agricultural loan. But the principle was the same. A wealthy individual or a group of investors would provide the ship owner with the necessary silver. The agreement would be carefully written down. If the voyage was successful, the ship owner would repay the loan along with the agreed-upon interest, making a profit for himself and for his lenders. If the ship was lost at sea, the debt was often forgiven. This system allowed ambitious merchants to undertake ventures that would have been impossible on their own, encouraging the flow of goods and ideas across the Mediterranean. So we see that early forms of credit, whether for a farmer's seed in Mesopotamia or a merchant's voyage in Greece, were formal agreements that allowed people to use future earnings to meet present needs. These loans, carefully recorded and based on mutual trust, were a quiet engine for economic activity. A small clay tablet rests on a shelf in a cool, dark room. Its cuneiform markings are a silent record of a farmer's hope and a lender's trust, a simple promise made in one season to be fulfilled in the next. While the great stone temples offered a sanctuary for significant wealth, the everyday needs of a bustling marketplace required something more immediate and accessible. In the busy public squares of ancient Greece and Rome, a new profession quietly took shape. These were the private money changers, individuals who set up small tables to offer financial services directly to the public. They were the first private bankers, and their business was built on expertise, reputation, and trust. These money changers, known as trepazitai asterisk in Greece, would establish their station, quite literally, a table or asterisk trapeza, in the agora, the heart of the city's commercial life. Their most essential service was currency exchange. In a world where every major city-state minted its own distinct coins, a traveling merchant might arrive in Athens with a pouch full of currency from Corinth, Sparta, and Aegina. To purchase local goods, he needed Athenian currency. He would bring his mixed collection of coins to the money changer's table. The money changer was a respected specialist. He would carefully examine each coin that was presented. He would place it on a small, precise set of bronze scales to verify its weight, knowing from experience the proper weight of a Corinthian stater or an Aeginetan turtle. He might also test the purity of the silver by its color, its texture, or the specific sound it made when gently dropped on his stone table. For a very small fee called a asterisk kolibos, he would exchange the foreign coins for the trusted Athenian owls. This simple service was essential for keeping the wheels of intercity trade turning smoothly. Over time, their role naturally expanded. Merchants who had a successful day at the market might not wish to carry a heavy, tempting pouch of coins home. They could leave their earnings with the money changer for safekeeping, much as they might with a temple. The money changer would keep meticulous records of these deposits in a ledger book. This led to another quiet innovation. Instead of physically withdrawing coins to pay a debt to another local merchant, a person could simply instruct their money changer to transfer the amount from their account to the other merchant's account, provided both used the same banker. This was an early form of a paperless transaction, a simple transfer of figures in a book. In Rome, these figures were known as quae argentarii. They sat at their benches, or asterisk bancae, in the forum, which is where the modern word bank comes from. They too exchanged currencies, accepted deposits, and gave out loans, becoming an indispensable part of the city's complex and orderly economic life. In this way, these private individuals, working from simple tables in public spaces, built the foundations of private banking. By offering practical services like currency exchange, holding deposits, and arranging credit, they made daily commerce more fluid and efficient for everyone. As the sun sets over the forum, the money changer packs away his tools for the day. The delicate scales are placed in their wooden box, The remaining coins are secured in a heavy pouch, and the ledger, filled with the day's quiet transactions, is closed. His table, the center of so much activity, now sits empty, waiting for the gentle rhythm of commerce to begin again with the morning light. As the practice of lending became more common, both from temples and from the tables of private money changers, a simple but important question arose. Why would someone lend their valuable grain or their hard-won silver coins to another person? The answer was found in a quiet, practical concept that has been part of finance ever since: the idea of interest. In its earliest forms, interest was a very natural idea, directly tied to the rhythms of the agricultural world. The ancient Sumerian word for interest was the same as the word for a baby calf. This gives us a simple picture of how it was understood. If a farmer borrowed a cow for a year, he might be expected to return the original cow, plus her calf, if she had one. The loan had produced something new. Similarly, if a farmer borrowed a bushel of seed grain for planting, he would return that bushel after the harvest, plus an extra portion from the abundant crop that the seed had helped to create. The interest was a share in the natural increase that the loan had made possible. When this idea was applied to money, the principle remained the same. When a money changer lent 10 silver denarii to a craftsman to buy new tools, that money was temporarily gone from the lender's own possession. He could not use it to buy goods for his own family or to invest in another venture. He was giving up the use of his own resources for a time. There was also always a small, quiet risk that the craftsman might be unable to repay the loan. Interest was the fee for this service, and this risk. The craftsman and the lender would agree on a set amount to be paid back, in addition to the original 10 coins. This amount was usually a set fraction, agreed upon in advance and written down in a contract. It was a predictable and transparent arrangement. The craftsman was happy to pay it, because the loan allowed him to buy better tools, which in turn allowed him to do better work and earn more than he otherwise could have. The lender was compensated for his risk and for the temporary loss of his own funds. The amount of interest would often depend on the level of risk involved. A loan to an established landowner to buy an adjacent field was considered very secure, and so the interest rate would be quite low. A loan to a sea merchant for a long voyage to a distant land was much riskier, as the ship could be lost in a storm. To compensate for this greater uncertainty, the interest rate for such a loan would be higher. It was a calm and logical system of balancing risk and reward. So we see that the concept of interest was a practical one. It was a fee paid for the temporary use of someone else's property, whether that was grain, livestock, or coins. It compensated the lender for the risk they took and the opportunity they gave up, while allowing the borrower to create new value. In the soft glow of an oil lamp, a scribe carefully draws the figures onto a papyrus scroll. The lines of ink represent the loan, the principal amount agreed upon. The small, added figure at the end represents the interest, a quiet promise of a future return, recorded and waiting for its season to arrive. As the Roman Republic expanded, managing the finances of its vast territories became a complex task. The state needed a steady flow of revenue to pay its soldiers, build its roads, and fund its public works. To manage this, the Romans developed a unique system that relied not on a large government bureaucracy, but on private enterprise. This was the system of tax farming, and the individuals who managed it were known as the *publicani. The *publicani* were typically wealthy Roman citizens who formed private companies. The process began with the Roman Senate, which would determine the amount of tax revenue needed from a particular province for the coming years. This could be a tax on land, on harvests, or on goods moving through a port. Instead of sending out its own officials to collect these taxes directly, the state held an auction. In a quiet, formal proceeding in Rome, the different companies of *publicani* would bid for the right to collect the taxes in that province. The company that offered the highest lump sum payment to the state treasury would win the contract. They would pay this enormous amount of money up front, directly into the state's coffers. This was a very efficient system for the government. It received its money immediately, in one large payment, and did not have to worry about the slow, difficult process of collecting from thousands of individuals across a distant province. The risk and the work were transferred to the private company. Once they had won the contract, it was up to the *publicani* to recoup their initial investment and, hopefully, to make a profit. They would send their own agents and local staff to the province to assess and collect the taxes that were due. This might involve measuring a farmer's fields to calculate the land tax, or stationing officials at a harbor to levy a customs duty on imported goods. Any amount they collected over and above the massive sum they had paid to the Roman state was their profit. This system had a profound impact on the flow of money throughout the empire. It created a powerful link between the state treasury in Rome and the economic life of the provinces. Large amounts of coin would flow from the provinces into the hands of the *publicani, who would then use it to make their lump sum payments to the state. The state, in turn, would use this revenue to pay its soldiers stationed on the frontiers. Those soldiers would then spend their silver denarii in local markets, and the coins would slowly filter back into the provincial economy, beginning the cycle anew. In this way, the *publicani* and the system of tax farming were a key part of Roman public finance. They were private companies that took on the role of collecting state taxes, providing the government with immediate, predictable revenue in exchange for the right to collect those taxes themselves. In a quiet office in Rome, a scroll is unrolled, its neat columns of figures detailing a tax contract for a distant province. The wax seal at the bottom is the mark of a *publicani* company. This simple document represents a massive flow of capital, a quiet, orderly system that connected the financial heart of the empire to its farthest-reaching limbs. As Roman commerce grew in complexity, a simple reliance on memory or loose receipts was no longer enough. For the *argentarii, the money changers in the forum, and for the great *publicani* companies managing vast sums, a more systematic way of tracking money was essential. This need led to the quiet, methodical practice of keeping detailed account books or ledgers. These were the essential tools for bringing order to a complex financial world. The primary accounting book for a Roman banker or a wealthy household was called the Codex Accepti et Expensi, which simply means the book of receipts and expenditures. This was typically a sturdy book made of bound wooden tablets coated in a layer of dark wax, or sometimes a more permanent volume of papyrus or parchment. Within its pages, every single transaction was carefully recorded in a neat and orderly fashion. The system they used was a form of simple double-entry bookkeeping. Each transaction was recorded twice, reflecting the two sides of the exchange. When a customer deposited a sum of money, the banker would make an entry on one side of the ledger, the *acceptum, to show that funds had been received. At the same time, he would create an entry for that customer's personal account, showing that the bank now owed that person money. Conversely, when a customer made a withdrawal or instructed the banker to pay a debt on their behalf, an entry would be made on the other side, the *expensum, to show that money had gone out. This method provided a clear and constant picture of the banker's financial position. At any time, he could add up all the entries on the *acceptum* side and compare them to the total on the *expensum* side. The difference would tell him exactly how much cash he should have on hand in his strongbox. This created a system of self-checking. If the numbers in the book did not match the physical coins in the chest, the banker knew a mistake had been made, and he could go back through his entries to find it. These ledgers were more than just personal records. They were respected legal documents. In a dispute over a debt, a Roman court would often accept a reputable banker's ledger as strong evidence of a transaction. The meticulous daily entries, recorded in chronological order, were seen as a reliable and unbiased account of what had occurred. This legal standing gave people great confidence in the banking system. It meant that their deposits were not just a matter of a handshake, but a formally recorded fact. Through the disciplined and routine practice of keeping detailed ledgers, Roman bankers and merchants brought a high degree of order and transparency to their work. This simple tool, a book with neat columns, was fundamental to managing complex finances and building the trust that underpinned the entire economy. At the end of a long day in the forum, a banker sits at his table by the light of a single oil lamp. He dips his stylus into the ink and makes the final entry in his ledger, the last transaction of the day. He closes the heavy cover of the book, the day's business now captured in quiet, orderly lines of text, safe until the morning. After the central authority of the Western Roman Empire slowly dissolved, the vast and unified economic system it supported began to change. This was not a sudden event, but a gradual transformation, like a great single river branching into hundreds of smaller local streams. The intricate network of imperial mints, which had once produced a consistent and reliable currency for the entire Mediterranean world, fell quiet. The regular shipments of silver and the official dies carved in Rome no longer arrived. In the new kingdoms that formed across Europe, local rulers, Frankish, Gothic, and Vandal kings, began to issue their own coins. At first, many of these new coins were direct imitations of the old Roman designs. A local king might mint a gold or silver coin that still bore the portrait of a Roman emperor, even an emperor who had been gone for generations. This was a practical choice. The image of the emperor was familiar and still carried an association of trust and value in the minds of the people. It was a way to make their new currency more readily acceptable in the marketplace. However, the consistency that had defined the Roman system was gone. Without access to the same large silver mines or the same strict quality controls, the purity of the silver and the weight of the coins began to vary significantly from one small kingdom to the next. A coin minted in a Gallic workshop might look very similar to one from a Spanish mint, but contain less precious metal. This introduced a new element of uncertainty into trade. The stamp on the coin was no longer an absolute guarantee of its worth. As a result, merchants and ordinary people had to adapt. They returned to an older, more careful method of commerce. The familiar merchant's scales, once used for weighing out silver dust before the age of coins, once again became a common sight in the market square. When presented with an unfamiliar coin, a shopkeeper would place it on his small bronze scale to check its weight. The value of the coin was becoming less about the image it carried and more about the actual amount of metal it contained. Trade became more localized, more cautious, and more focused on the tangible substance of the money itself. So we have seen that the end of the unified Roman system did not mean the end of money, but its fragmentation. The single empire-wide currency was gradually replaced by a patchwork of local coinages of varying quality. This change brought back the need to weigh coins, as their value came to depend more on their physical metal content than on the authority of the stamp. A small silver coin rests in the pan of a bronze scale. The image on its face is a faint echo of a Roman emperor's profile, the lines blurred and uncertain. The scale tips, measuring not the promise of an empire, but the simple, physical weight of the metal itself. In this quiet act, the nature of money had shifted back to something more immediate and tangible. While the monetary system of Western Europe became fragmented, a beacon of stability continued to shine brightly in the East. The Eastern Roman Empire, which we now call the Byzantine Empire with its magnificent capital at Constantinople, carried on the traditions of Roman administration and commerce. At the heart of its enduring economic strength was a single, remarkable coin, the gold solidus. The solidus was first introduced in the late Roman period, but it was in the Byzantine era that it truly became legendary. For nearly 1,000 years, this one coin maintained an incredibly consistent weight and purity. It was a thin, broad disk of almost pure gold, meticulously produced in the imperial mints. This unwavering quality was the secret to its long life and its extraordinary influence. It was a physical testament to the stability and organizational power of the Byzantine state. The design of the solidus was distinct. On one side, it typically featured a portrait of the reigning emperor or emperors, not in the realistic Roman style, but in a more formal, symbolic, and spiritual manner. They were often shown facing forward, their expressions serene and unchanging. On the other side, a Christian symbol was usually depicted, such as a cross or an angel. These images conveyed a message of divine authority and imperial permanence. The solidus was a high-value coin, primarily used for large transactions, international trade, and state payments. It was the coin used to pay diplomats, high-ranking officials, and elite soldiers. More importantly, it became the preferred currency for long-distance trade across a vast part of the world. A merchant in a bustling Italian port city, a trader on the Silk Road, or a ship captain in an Egyptian harbor would all recognize and eagerly accept the Byzantine solidus. Its reputation was so great that it was often simply called a Byzant by those outside the empire. This widespread trust made the solidus a vital anchor in the often uncertain economic waters of the early medieval period. While local silver and bronze coins might fluctuate in value, the gold solidus was a dependable standard. It provided a common measure of worth that allowed trade to continue to flow between the Christian West, the Byzantine world, and the Islamic caliphates. It was a quiet thread of continuity, a piece of the old Roman order that survived and thrived, facilitating the exchange of goods and ideas across cultural and political boundaries. So while Western Europe experienced monetary fragmentation, the Byzantine Empire maintained a highly stable gold coin called the solidus. Its consistent purity and weight over many centuries made it the most trusted international currency of its time, a vital and calming presence in the world of medieval trade. A single gold solidus rests on a piece of dark, embroidered silk. The formal portrait of a Byzantine emperor stares out from its surface, the gold as bright as the day it was minted. It is a small, quiet disk, a survivor of a lost empire, and a symbol of 1,000 years of unwavering value. As new centers of trade and culture flourished across the Middle East, North Africa, and the Iberian Peninsula, a sophisticated system of commerce and finance developed alongside them. This system was unique, built upon a foundation of ethical principles derived from Islamic teachings. It was a world of bustling souks and long-distance caravan routes, all governed by a quiet, shared understanding of how business should be conducted. At the core of this financial system was a principle that set it apart from many others. This was the avoidance of ribo, the practice of charging a fixed, predetermined interest on a loan. The underlying idea was a simple one, that money, on its own, should not simply generate more money without being connected to a real economic activity involving work, effort, or risk. Instead of lending money at interest, this system encouraged participation, partnership, and the sharing of both risk and reward. This led to the development of unique contractual arrangements. One of the most common was a form of partnership known as mudaraba. Imagine a wealthy individual in Baghdad who has capital but does not wish to travel, and a skilled merchant who has the expertise to lead a caravan along the Silk Road but lacks the funds. They could enter into a mudaraba agreement. The investor would provide the capital, a chest of gold dinars for example, to finance the entire venture. The merchant would provide his labor, his knowledge, and his time. They would agree, in a carefully written contract, on how any future profits would be shared, perhaps 50-50, or 60% for the merchant and 40% for the investor. The merchant would then undertake his long journey. If the venture was successful and he returned with a handsome profit, it would be divided according to their original agreement. However, if the venture failed through no fault of the merchant, perhaps the caravan was lost in a sandstorm, the risk was also shared. The investor would lose his capital, and the merchant would have lost his time and effort. The loss was not a debt to be repaid. This system tied the success of the financier directly to the success of the real-world commercial enterprise. Another similar arrangement was the musharaka, a joint venture where both parties might contribute capital and both might be involved in managing the business. Again, profits and losses were shared according to a pre-agreed ratio, creating a relationship built on mutual participation. So we can see that early Islamic finance was not based on the lending of money for a fixed return. Instead, it was centered on the idea of partnership, where capital and labor would join together to share in the actual outcomes of trade and commerce. In the quiet courtyard of a caravanserai, an investor and a merchant sit together with a small ledger. By the light of a lantern, they review the numbers from a successful journey. The profits, a collection of gold dinars and silver dirhams, are divided according to the simple, honest lines of their original agreement, a quiet testament to a journey undertaken and a risk shared. In the medieval world, long-distance travel was a slow and often uncertain undertaking. For a nobleman, a merchant, or a devout pilgrim wishing to journey from a place like France or England to the Holy Land, one of the greatest practical challenges was how to carry the large amount of money needed for such a trip. Traveling with a heavy chest of gold and silver coins was cumbersome and made one a visible target. A new, more secure way of moving wealth was needed, and the solution came from an unexpected source, a military religious order known as the Knights Templar. The Templars had a unique position in medieval society. They were a respected and powerful organization with a network of fortified houses, called preceptories, spread all across Europe and the Crusader states. These preceptories were secure, well-managed, and connected by a reliable system of communication. This extensive network became the foundation for one of the earliest and most sophisticated international banking systems. The process they developed was elegantly simple and built on trust. A person planning a long journey could visit their local Templar preceptory, for instance, the one in London. There, they would deposit their travel funds, a sum of gold or silver coins. The Templar treasurer would carefully count the money and record the deposit in a meticulously kept ledger. In exchange, the traveler would be given not a pouch of coins, but a simple letter of credit. This was a piece of parchment, inscribed with the details of the deposit in a special cipher or code known only to the order. It was then authenticated with the Templar's distinctive wax seal. The traveler could now embark on his journey, carrying only this light, unassuming piece of parchment. It had no value to anyone else, as only the Templars could decipher its meaning. After months of travel, upon arriving safely in a city like Acre or Jerusalem, he would seek out the Templar headquarters there. He would present his letter of credit. The local Templar treasurer would verify the seal and use his key to decode the message. Once authenticated, the traveler would be given the equivalent sum of his original deposit in the local currency of that region. For this secure and convenient service, the Templars would typically take a small fee, often by adjusting the exchange rate. This system effectively created a way to transfer funds across thousands of miles without a single coin ever making the physical journey. It was a medieval version of a traveler's check, a system of moving value through information rather than through bullion. This quiet innovation not only made pilgrimages safer, but also became essential for kings and nobles who needed to move vast sums of money to fund their own activities abroad. In this way, the Knights Templar used their widespread and trusted network of preceptories to create an early form of international banking. By allowing people to deposit money in one location and withdraw it in another using a coded letter of credit, they provided a secure and orderly solution to the challenges of long-distance travel. In the dim, quiet light of a candle, a Templar scribe in a stone-walled room closes his heavy ledger. The day's accounts are balanced, the neat columns of figures representing funds held in trust. Outside, the world is in motion, but within these walls, the system of credit rests on a foundation of order, discipline, and a quiet, written promise. As the High Middle Ages unfolded, a new energy began to stir in the towns and port cities of Northern Europe. Trade, which had become localized for centuries, began to reach across the seas once more. At the center of this quiet resurgence was a unique and powerful association of merchant guilds in their towns, known as the Hanseatic League. This was not a country or a kingdom, but a cooperative network dedicated to the simple, practical goals of safe and profitable trade. The League was born from a shared need for security. The Baltic and North Seas could be dangerous, with unpredictable weather and the threat of piracy. A single merchant ship traveling alone was vulnerable. So merchants from cities like Lübeck, Hamburg, and Bremen began to pool their resources. They would form convoys, sailing together in groups for mutual protection. They also worked together to build lighthouses on treacherous coastlines and to dredge shipping channels, making the sea routes safer for everyone. This cooperation soon extended beyond safety at sea. The League established a network of permanent trading posts, called kontor, in key foreign cities like London, Bruges, and Novgorod. A konsok was a walled compound, a small, self-contained German town within a foreign city. It had its own warehouses for storing goods, its own living quarters for the merchants, its own chapel, and its own set of rules. This provided Hanseatic merchants with a secure and predictable base of operations when they were far from home. Within this network, the League specialized in the calm, steady exchange of bulk goods. From the vast forests of Russia, they brought furs and wax. From the plains of Poland and Prussia, they transported enormous quantities of grain. From Sweden, they brought copper and iron ore, and from the coast of Norway, they traded in salted and dried fish. In return, they carried finished goods from the west, fine wool cloth from Flanders, wine from France, and salt from Lüneburg. It was a simple, reciprocal flow of raw materials for manufactured products. To keep this vast network running smoothly, the Hanseatic League developed its own system of commercial law and held regular assemblies, called Hansetage, where representatives from the member cities would meet to settle disputes and agree on common policies. Their focus was always on the practical details of commerce, standardizing weights and measures, ensuring the quality of goods, and creating a predictable legal framework for their contracts. In this way, the Hanseatic League was a quiet force for order and stability in medieval commerce. It was a voluntary alliance of merchants who worked together to make long-distance trades safer, more reliable, and more efficient, linking the economies of Northern Europe in a vast and orderly web of exchange. In the dim, cavernous space of a Hanseatic warehouse in Bruges, barrels of salted fish are stacked high, waiting for their journey inland. The air is cool and still, filled with the faint scent of wood, salt, and distant seas. This simple, essential commodity is just one small part of a great, silent network that connected a continent through the steady, predictable routines of trade. As trade in medieval Europe grew more sophisticated, so did the financial tools used to support it. One of the greatest challenges for a long-distance merchant was still the physical movement of money. Carrying large quantities of gold and silver coins across the continent was not only inconvenient but also risky. In the bustling merchant cities of northern Italy, a new instrument was refined to solve this very problem: the bill of exchange. The bill of exchange was, at its heart, a written promise. It was a simple piece of paper, but it represented a quiet revolution in how payments were made. The process was built on a network of trusted merchant bankers who had agents or partners in different cities. Let's imagine a wool merchant in Florence who has sold a large shipment of cloth to a buyer in Bruges. Instead of waiting for the buyer to send a heavy chest of coins back to him, they could use a bill of exchange. The process would begin with the buyer in Bruges. He would go to a local banker there and pay him the amount he owed for the wool, let's say 100 gold florins. In return, the banker would give him a written document, the bill of exchange. This document was essentially a formal letter instructing the banker's agent in Florence to pay 100 florins to the Florentine wool merchant. The buyer would then send this bill of exchange, a single light piece of paper, to the wool merchant in Florence. The merchant, upon receiving it, would take it to the Florentine agent of the Bruges bank. The agent would verify the document, check the signature, and then pay the merchant his 100 florins from the funds he held locally. The debt was settled, and not a single coin had to make the long, dangerous journey from Bruges to Florence. This system had another subtle but important feature. The payment in Florence was often scheduled for a future date, perhaps 90 days after the bill was written. This delay served as a form of credit, giving the buyer in Bruges time to sell the wool he had just purchased before he needed to have the funds available to pay the banker. The bill of exchange also cleverly dealt with the problem of different local currencies. The document would specify the exchange rate between the Flemish currency and the Florentine florin, locking it in at the time the bill was created and removing any uncertainty about currency fluctuations during the 90-day period. So the bill of exchange was a powerful tool that served multiple purposes. It was a safe way to transfer money, a simple form of credit, and a mechanism for exchanging currencies, all contained within one modest piece of paper. On a heavy oak desk in a Florentine counting house, a merchant examines a freshly arrived bill of exchange. The paper is folded. The wax seal is intact. He reads the clear, handwritten script, a quiet instruction that connects the work of his weavers in Florence to the needs of a clothier in a distant northern city, a silent and orderly link in the great chain of commerce. As the medieval period gave way to the Renaissance, the economic heart of Europe beat strongest in the vibrant city-states of Italy. These bustling hubs of art, culture, and commerce required a currency as stable and prestigious as the Byzantine solidus had once been. Out of this need, two of the most famous and trusted coins in history were born: the Florentine florin and the Venetian ducat. In the mid-13th century, the powerful city-state of Florence, enriched by its booming wool trade and sophisticated banking houses, decided to issue a new gold coin. This was the florin. It was a small, elegant disc, struck from virtually pure gold, a standard that the city would guard with immense civic pride for centuries. The design was simple and clear. On one side was the city's emblem, the fleur-de-lis, a stylized lily. On the other was a standing figure of St. John the Baptist, the patron saint of Florence. At almost the same time, the great maritime Republic of Venice, a dominant power in Mediterranean trade, introduced its own gold coin. This was the ducat. Like the florin, it was made of the highest purity gold, and its weight and quality were maintained with unwavering consistency. Its design showed the Doge, the leader of Venice, kneeling before the city's patron, St. Mark. The ducat was sometimes called a zecchino, after the Venetian mint, the zecca, where it was produced. The key to the success of both the florin and the ducat was their absolute reliability. The governments of Florence and Venice understood that the reputation of their currency was directly tied to the reputation of their city. They resisted any temptation to debase the coinage by adding less valuable metals. A florin minted in the 15th century contained the same amount of pure gold as one minted in the 13th. This created a profound and lasting sense of trust. This trust made the two coins the dominant currencies of international trade in Europe for over 300 years. A merchant in London, a banker in Bruges, or a spice trader in Alexandria would all accept a florin or a ducat without hesitation. They knew its value was true. These coins became the standard by which other currencies were measured. Prices for major international commodities like pepper, silk, or wool were often quoted in florins or ducats. Even in places where the coins themselves were rarely seen, they provided a stable, predictable unit of account for the entire European economy. So we see that the Florentine florin and the Venetian ducat were two new gold coins whose value was guaranteed by the unwavering commitment of their respective cities to purity and consistency. This reliability made them the most trusted and widely accepted currencies of their age. A gold florin lies on a dark, polished wooden surface. The light catches the delicate lines of the fleur-de-lis on its face. It is a small object of immense prestige, a quiet symbol of a city's pride and a continent's trust. Its value was not just in its gold, but in the simple, unbroken promise it represented. The creation of stable, trusted gold coins like the florin and the ducat was not just a matter of convenience. It was a fundamental pillar upon which the prosperity of the Italian city-states was built. This reliability in their money created a calm and predictable environment, allowing their complex economies of banking, art, and trade to flourish. For the great banking families of Florence, the florin was the very bedrock of their business. When they arranged a large loan to a king or a pope, the amount was calculated in florins. When they accepted deposits from wealthy merchants, the accounts were kept in florins. The coin's unchanging value meant that a debt recorded 1 year would have the same real worth when it was repaid years later. This removed a huge amount of uncertainty from the world of finance. It allowed for long-term planning and investment, which in turn funded the creation of magnificent cathedrals, stunning works of art, and ambitious trading voyages. In Venice, the ducat played a similar role, but with a focus on maritime trade. Venice was the gateway between Europe and the East, and its merchants dealt in high-value goods like spices, silks, and precious gems. These transactions required a currency that was recognized and trusted in the markets of Alexandria, Constantinople, and beyond. The ducat, with its pure gold content, was precisely that. A Venetian merchant could purchase a cargo of pepper in Egypt with ducats, confident that their value would be accepted without question. The coin was a key that unlocked the doors of international commerce. This monetary stability also had a quiet, profound effect on the daily life and work of the skilled artisans who made these cities famous. A master painter in Florence, when accepting a commission to paint a fresco, could agree on a price in florins. He knew that the florins he received upon completion of his work would have the same purchasing power as when he began. This allowed him to buy his expensive pigments, the lapis lazuli for his blues, the gold leaf for his halos, with confidence. It created an atmosphere of economic calm that was essential for the sustained production of art and craftsmanship. The governments of these city-states understood this connection deeply. They saw their currency as a direct reflection of their city's honor and stability. The mints, the zecca in Venice and its equivalent in Florence, were among the most important civic institutions. They were managed with meticulous care, and the officials who oversaw the purity of the coinage, the asterisks saggiatori, were held in the highest regard. To debase the currency would have been to betray the public trust and damage the city's international standing, something that was simply unthinkable. In essence, the reliable gold currencies of the Italian city-states were a foundation of trust. This trust fostered a stable environment for banking, made long-distance trade more secure, and supported the quiet, dedicated work of countless artisans, contributing directly to an era of extraordinary prosperity and cultural achievement. In the soft light of a workshop, a bookkeeper for a merchant guild dips his quill in ink. He writes a figure in his ledger, followed by the symbol for the florin. The entry is a simple record of a transaction, but it rests on a deep and solid foundation, the unwavering value of the small gold coin that powered the life of his city. As the financial world of the Italian city-states grew ever more complex, with webs of international trade, loans, and investments, the simple bookkeeping methods of the past were no longer sufficient. To bring a new level of clarity and order to their business, the Italian merchant bankers perfected a system that would become the cornerstone of modern accounting, the double-entry ledger. The core idea of this system was elegantly simple. It was based on the understanding that every single financial transaction has two equal and opposite effects. If a merchant sells a bolt of cloth, he loses the cloth but gains the money. If he buys a shipment of wool, he gains the wool but loses the money. The double-entry system was a way of recording both of these effects for every transaction, creating a complete and balanced picture of the business. The system worked using two key concepts: debits and credits. These were simply the Latin words for he owes and he trusts. In the ledger book, the pages were divided into two columns. A debit, entered on the left side, represented an increase in an asset or an expense. A credit, entered on the right side, represented an increase in a liability or an income. Let's imagine a Florentine banker receives a deposit of 10 gold florins from a client. He would make two entries in his great ledger. First, he would make a debit entry of 10 florins in his cash account, because the amount of physical coin in his strongbox has gone up. At the same time, he would make a credit entry of 10 florins in the account of that specific client. This second entry records the fact that the bank now has a liability. It owes 10 florins to that client. The two entries, one debit and one credit, are equal. The books are in balance. This method was applied to every aspect of the business. If the banker made a loan, the loans receivable account would be debited, and the cash account would be credited. If he earned a fee, his cash would be debited, and income would be credited. It was a calm, methodical, and relentless process of recording the two sides of every event. The true power of this system was revealed at the end of an accounting period. The banker could add up all the debit columns and all the credit columns from his entire ledger. If the work had been done correctly, the two grand totals would be exactly the same. This was the trial balance. If they did not match, it was an immediate, clear signal that a mistake had been made somewhere in the countless entries. The accountant could then go back through the books, page by page, to find and correct the error. This provided an unprecedented level of accuracy and confidence. In this way, the double-entry ledger system was a quiet but profound innovation. It brought mathematical order and a self-correcting logic to the complex world of Renaissance finance, allowing businesses to have a clear, accurate, and constantly updated view of their financial health. In a quiet counting house, lit by the afternoon sun streaming through a tall window, an accountant closes his heavy ledger. The final totals at the bottom of the two columns match perfectly. The day's work is done, the accounts are balanced. The book itself, filled with neat, parallel entries, is a silent testament to a system of perfect, logical order. The adoption of double-entry bookkeeping did more than just ensure accuracy. It fundamentally changed how merchants and bankers understood and managed their businesses. It transformed finance from a simple process of tracking cash into a sophisticated system for analyzing wealth and making calm, informed decisions. Before this system, a merchant's understanding of his own success was often quite simple. He might look at the amount of coin in his strongbox at the end of the year and compare it to what he had at the beginning. If he had more, it was a good year. But this didn't provide a very detailed picture. The double-entry ledger, however, allowed for a much deeper and more nuanced view. Because every aspect of the business was given its own separate account in the ledger, a merchant could now see exactly where his money was coming from and where it was going. He could look at the wool sales account and see his total income from that commodity. He could then compare it to the wool purchases account and the shipping costs account. By subtracting the costs from the income, he could calculate the precise profit he was making on wool. He could do the same for silk, for spices, or for any other part of his business. This ability to isolate and analyze different parts of the enterprise was revolutionary. A merchant might discover that while his wool trade was very profitable, he was actually losing money on his spice shipments. This knowledge allowed him to make strategic choices. He might decide to focus more of his capital on the profitable wool business and reduce his involvement in the spice trade. It was a move from operating on instinct to managing with clear, factual information. The system also provided a clear view of who owed the business money, accounts receivable, and who the business owed money to, accounts payable. A quick glance at the ledger would show a merchant if a particular client was taking too long to pay their debts. It gave him the information he needed to manage his credit and cash flow in a much more orderly way. Furthermore, this systematic record-keeping was essential for forming partnerships. When several individuals decided to pool their capital to fund a large venture, like outfitting a new ship, the double-entry ledger provided a transparent and trusted record of every partner's investment and every expense. At the end of the voyage, the profits could be calculated with precision and distributed fairly among the partners according to their initial contributions. This clarity helped to build the trust necessary for these larger, more ambitious undertakings. In summary, the new accounting method provided a detailed map of a business's financial landscape. It allowed merchants to see what was profitable, manage credit effectively, and form complex partnerships with confidence, bringing a new level of rational and calm management to the world of commerce. The heavy ledger lies open on the desk, its pages filled with the neat, balanced entries of the day. Each number, each line, is a small piece of a larger story. It is a quiet, orderly world of figures that reflects the real world of ships, goods, and transactions, giving a clear and steady view of the flow of money. In the heart of Renaissance Florence, one family name became synonymous with the world of finance: Medici. The Medici Bank was not the first bank, nor the only one, but under the careful guidance of Giovanni di Medici and later his son Cosimo, it grew to become the most powerful and respected financial institution in all of Europe. Its success was built on a foundation of quiet innovation, cautious management, and an unparalleled network of connections. The structure of the Medici Bank was one of its most important features. It was not a single, monolithic entity. Instead, it was organized as a holding company with a central office in Florence that oversaw a series of legally separate, semi-independent branch offices in key cities across Europe: London, Bruges, Geneva, Venice, and Rome. Each branch was a partnership between the Medici family in Florence and the local branch manager, who was a trusted and experienced banker in his own right. This structure was a very deliberate and prudent design. The branch manager, as a junior partner, had a personal stake in the success of his branch, which encouraged careful and responsible management. More importantly, this separation meant that the failure of one branch would not automatically bring down the entire network. If the London branch made a series of poor loans and became insolvent, the partners there would bear the loss. But the other branches in Bruges or Venice could continue their business unaffected. It was a system designed for stability and resilience. The main business of the bank was not serving the general public, but rather high-value clients. They were the bankers to popes, kings, and the great merchant houses of Europe. One of their most important services was facilitating international payments through bills of exchange. With their network of branches, they could move vast sums of money across the continent with just the stroke of a pen in their ledgers, avoiding the risks of transporting physical gold. They also dealt extensively in foreign currency exchange, profiting from their expert knowledge of the relative values of the many different coinages circulating in Europe. The Medici were famously cautious lenders. They preferred to finance established and reliable commercial ventures, particularly the trade in high-value goods like wool, silk, and alum, a vital chemical used in the textile industry. They kept meticulous records using the double-entry method, allowing them to have a clear and constant overview of the health of their entire operation. The head office in Florence would receive regular, detailed reports from each branch manager, which were carefully reviewed and recorded in the bank's secret ledgers, the libri segreti. Through this combination of a decentralized yet centrally controlled structure, a focus on reliable clients, and the use of the most advanced accounting methods of the day, the Medici Bank established a dominant and trusted presence. It was a quiet, orderly engine that helped to finance the commerce, the politics, and the art of the Renaissance. In the Medici headquarters in Florence, a senior clerk carefully unseals a letter that has just arrived by courier from the Bruges branch. He smooths out the parchment and begins to read the neat, handwritten report. The figures within will soon be transferred to the master ledger, another small, quiet piece of information added to the great financial map of Europe. The vast wealth and influence of a banking house like the Medici was not an end in itself. It was a tool, a resource that allowed them to shape the world around them in quiet yet profound ways. The profits generated from the meticulous entries in their ledgers were transformed into the stone, paint, and political stability that defined the Florentine Renaissance. One of the most visible uses of this wealth was the patronage of art and architecture. When the Medici decided to fund the construction of a new chapel or to commission a painting from a master artist, their banking network made the process smooth and orderly. An artist needed a steady supply of expensive materials: gold leaf from one city, rare blue pigment ground from lapis lazuli imported by sea from another. The Medici Bank could easily arrange for these payments to be made through its various branches. The artist would be given a letter of credit, which he could then present to the bank's agent in Venice or Naples to acquire the materials he needed. This freed the artist from the practical worries of finance, allowing him to focus on his creative work. This patronage was not simply a matter of personal taste, it was also a form of public contribution and a quiet display of power and piety. The family's emblem, the Medici coat of arms with its distinct spheres, would be discreetly carved into the stone of the buildings they funded. It was a visible reminder to the people of Florence that the family's success was being reinvested into the beauty and prestige of their shared city. The bank's profits, earned through international commerce, were thus transformed into the tangible cultural heritage of their home. Beyond art, the bank's financial network was an essential instrument of diplomacy and politics. The Medici were the primary bankers for the papacy in Rome. The Roman Curia was a vast international organization that needed to collect church revenues, tithes, and fees from all across Christendom. The Medici branch in Rome would manage this complex process. They would coordinate with their other branches in London, Paris, and beyond to collect these funds. Using their system of bills of exchange, they could consolidate this revenue and transfer it to the papal treasury in Rome efficiently and securely, without the need for risky shipments of coin. This indispensable service gave the Medici immense influence at the very heart of European power. This influence was then used to benefit Florence. If their home city needed a political ally or a favorable trade agreement, the Medici could use their financial relationships and the goodwill they had built up over years of reliable service to help negotiate it. Their role as trusted financial intermediaries gave them a unique position at the table of European politics, allowing them to act as quiet diplomats and protectors of Florentine interests. In this way, the sophisticated financial machine of the Medici Bank was deeply intertwined with the cultural and political life of its time. The bank provided the calm, orderly financial foundation that made possible the creation of timeless art and the delicate work of statecraft. In the quiet of a Florentine chapel, candlelight flickers across a newly finished fresco. The vibrant colors, made from pigments sourced from across the known world, are a testament to the artist's skill. But they are also a silent testament to the complex and unseen financial network that made their acquisition possible, a network of ledgers, letters, and quiet, reliable credit. For centuries, the total amount of gold and silver circulating in Europe had been relatively stable. The supply of precious metals grew only slowly, limited by the output of old European mines. This scarcity helped to keep the value of coins, like the florin and the ducat, very consistent over long periods. But in the 16th century, this long era of monetary quiet came to a gradual end. The reason lay across the Atlantic Ocean, in the vast newly encountered lands of the Americas. Spanish explorers and conquistadors discovered immense sources of gold, and, even more significantly, silver, particularly in the mountainous regions of present-day Mexico and Bolivia. The Great Silver Mountain of Potosi, for example, would become one of the most productive sources of silver the world had ever known. This discovery set in motion a steady and massive flow of precious metals back to Europe. The process of moving this wealth was a huge and carefully organized undertaking. At the mining sites, the raw silver ore was extracted and refined into large, heavy bars. These bars were stamped with official marks to certify their purity. They were then transported by mule trains down to the coastal ports, a slow and arduous journey. At the ports, the silver was loaded onto the famous Spanish treasure fleets. These were large, well-armed convoys of galleons that would sail together once or twice a year for protection on the long and hazardous voyage across the Atlantic. The primary destination for this fleet was the port of Seville in southern Spain. The arrival of the treasure fleet was a major event. Dockworkers would carefully unload the heavy chests, and the silver bars would be taken under heavy guard to the royal mint, the Casa de la Moneda. Here a significant portion, typically 1/5, known as the quinto real asterisk or the royal fifth, was set aside for the Spanish crown. The rest belonged to the private mine owners and investors who had financed the operations. Inside the mint, the great silver bars were melted down and struck into a new, standardized coin, the Spanish real de a ocho, or piece of 8. This was a large, heavy silver coin of reliable purity, which would soon become the world's first truly global currency. Millions upon millions of these coins were produced, and they began to pour into the Spanish economy. This sudden and massive increase in the sheer quantity of money was something Europe had never experienced before. For the first time in history, the amount of silver in circulation was not a small, slow trickle, but a great, flowing river. This vast new supply of metal, arriving year after year, would have a quiet but profound and lasting effect on the value of money and the price of everyday goods all across the continent. So we see that the discovery of vast silver and gold deposits in the Americas led to a steady and enormous shipment of these metals back to Spain. This influx turned into coins like the piece of 8, dramatically increased the amount of money circulating in Europe, setting the stage for a new economic era. In the deep, quiet hold of a Spanish galleon, chests filled with silver bars are stacked neatly in the darkness. The ship sways gently with the ocean's swell. The metal inside is on the final leg of a long journey, a silent cargo of immense value, destined to change the gentle rhythm of the European economy forever. The immense quantities of silver arriving in Spain did not stay there for long. The Spanish crown used its newfound wealth to pay for its vast armies, to import luxury goods, and to service its debts with bankers in places like Genoa and Antwerp. This meant that the new silver coins, the pieces of 8, quickly spread out from Spain and began to circulate throughout the rest of Europe. This massive increase in the money supply had a very gradual but very noticeable effect on the economy. It was a phenomenon that came to be known as the price revolution. The core idea is a simple one, based on the relationship between the amount of money available and the amount of goods available to buy. For centuries, this relationship had been relatively balanced. Now, there was suddenly much more money in people's hands. A landowner who sold his grain, or a merchant who sold his cloth, was now receiving more silver coins in payment than ever before. With more money, people naturally wanted to buy more things. However, the ability of the economy to produce more things, more bread, more wool, more tools, did not increase as quickly as the money supply did. The number of bakers, weavers, and blacksmiths, and the amount of land available for farming grew only slowly. This created a gentle but persistent imbalance. There was now more money chasing roughly the same amount of goods. As a result, the sellers of those goods found that they could begin to ask for higher prices. A baker, seeing that many people had more coins and were eager to buy bread, might raise his price from 1 copper coin to 2. He was not being greedy, he was simply responding to the increased demand. This process happens slowly and unevenly across all sectors of the economy. The price of land, the cost of food, and the wages paid to laborers all began to drift gently upwards over the course of several decades. This was the first widespread and prolonged experience of what we now call inflation. It is the simple observation that when the amount of money in an economy grows significantly faster than the production of goods and services, the value of each individual coin begins to fall. It takes more coins to buy the same item. A silver coin, which was once a rare and precious object, was now more common. Because it was less scarce, its purchasing power, what it could actually buy, diminished. People noticed that the cost of living was steadily rising, a quiet but profound shift from the long centuries of stable prices that had come before. So the flood of New World silver into Europe created a situation where there was more money in circulation than there were goods to buy. This led to a slow, steady increase in the general level of prices for everyday items, a period of gentle but persistent inflation, known as the price revolution. In a quiet marketplace in Antwerp, a woman buys a loaf of bread. She counts out the copper coins into the baker's hand, a few more than her mother would have paid for the same loaf a generation earlier. The transaction is simple and everyday, but it is a small reflection of a great silent change that was slowly reshaping the value of money across an entire continent. For centuries, banking in Europe had been the domain of private individuals and powerful families. These private banks were essential, but they carried a certain risk. If a private banker made poor decisions, or if their family fell on hard times, the bank could fail, and its depositors could lose their money. As commerce grew ever larger and more complex, the great trading cities of Europe began to feel the need for a financial institution that offered a greater sense of permanence and security. This led to the creation of the first public banks, institutions guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the city government itself. One of the earliest and most influential of these was the Banco di Rialto, founded in Venice at the end of the 16th century. Venice was a city built on trade, and its merchants conducted a huge volume of transactions every day. They needed a system that was not only secure, but also highly efficient. The Banco di Rialto was the city's answer to this need. The bank was established by a decree of the Venetian Senate and was located in the heart of the city's commercial district, the Rialto. Its primary function was to be a bank of deposit. Merchants could bring their gold ducats and silver coins to the bank and open an account. The bank was legally forbidden from making loans. Its sole purpose was to safeguard its depositors' money and to facilitate payments between them. This no-lending rule was a key feature, designed to ensure that the bank would always have 100% of its deposits on hand, making it incredibly safe. The true innovation of the Banco di Rialto was the way it made payments. Once a merchant had an account, he no longer needed to use physical coins for his daily business in the Rialto market. Instead, he could settle a debt by simply instructing the bank to transfer funds from his account to another merchant's account. This was done in person, at the bank's counter. Imagine two merchants who have just agreed on a large sale of spices. They would walk together to the Banco di Rialto. There, in front of a bank clerk, the buyer would state his name, the name of the seller, and the amount to be transferred. The clerk, a sworn public official, would check the buyer's account to ensure he had sufficient funds. He would then open the great ledger of the bank. With a quill pen, he would make two simple entries. He would debit the account of the buyer, reducing his balance, and he would credit the account of the seller, increasing his. The transaction was complete. It was a simple, secure, and almost instantaneous transfer of value, all recorded in an official public book. This system, known as giro banking from the Italian word for circulation, made commerce in Venice incredibly fluid. It reduced the need to constantly count and weigh physical coins, which could be of varying quality, and eliminated the risk of theft in the busy marketplace. In essence, the Banco di Rialto was a state-guaranteed institution created to provide a secure place for deposits and a highly efficient method for transferring funds between merchant accounts. It was a quiet, orderly public utility for the world of commerce. In the grand hall of the Banco di Rialto, the low murmur of business fills the air. A clerk sits before a massive, leather-bound ledger. He dips his pen in the inkwell and makes a neat, careful entry, the lines of ink representing a silent, invisible transfer of wealth. A quiet and orderly moment in the ceaseless flow of Venetian trade. In the early 17th century, the center of European commerce began to shift north to the bustling port city of Amsterdam. The Dutch Republic was entering its golden age, a period of extraordinary prosperity driven by its vast global trading empire. Amsterdam became the warehouse of the world, a place where goods from every corner of the globe were bought and sold. This incredible volume of trade brought with it a particular challenge, a confusing and chaotic flood of different currencies. A merchant in Amsterdam might receive payment in Spanish pieces of 8, French EQ, German thalers, and a host of other gold and silver coins from various small states and cities. Many of these coins were worn down from years of circulation, and some had been deliberately clipped or debased. This made every transaction a slow and uncertain process of weighing, testing, and calculating the true value of each coin. To bring order to this monetary chaos, the city of Amsterdam established its own public bank in 1609, the famous asterisk Wissel Bank, or Bank of Exchange. The Wissel Bank was modeled on the successful Venetian public banks, but it was adapted to solve Amsterdam's specific problem. Its primary purpose was to create a single, reliable unit of account. A merchant would bring his collection of mixed, real-world coins to the bank. The bank's expert assayers would carefully weigh and test the metal, determining its exact precious metal content. Based on this value, the merchant's account would be credited with a sum of a new, abstract currency that existed only in the bank's ledgers, the bank florin. This bank florin, or guilder, was a perfectly stable and unchanging unit of value. It was a promise from the city of Amsterdam, backed by the real silver and gold held securely in the bank's deep vaults. Once a merchant had an account in bank florins, he could conduct his business with incredible ease. Major commercial transactions in the city were, in fact, required by law to be settled through the Wissel Bank. The process was similar to that in Venice. A merchant would simply go to the bank and authorize a transfer from his account to another. The payment was instant, secure, and recorded in the city's official books. This system created a level of trust and efficiency that was unmatched anywhere else in the world. Merchants from all over Europe opened accounts at the Whistle Bank, knowing that its bank money was the most reliable and convenient form of currency available. The Whistle Bank was famously secretive about its operations, but it built an unshakable reputation for integrity. It was widely believed to hold reserves of gold and silver equal to all of the bank florins recorded in its ledgers. This absolute trust in the bank's stability made Amsterdam the financial capital of the world, a quiet, orderly hub around which the entire global economy turned. So, the Amsterdam Whistle Bank was created to solve the problem of a confusing variety of circulating coins. By converting all of these into a single, stable bank money for use in its ledgers, it provided a remarkably secure and efficient payment system that became the foundation of Dutch commercial dominance. In the deep, cool vaults beneath Amsterdam's City Hall, rows of wooden chests are filled with gold and silver coins from 100 different mints. This vast, silent treasure is the physical anchor for the numbers in the ledgers upstairs. It is a quiet, hidden guarantee of stability, the firm foundation of a city built on the steady, predictable flow of global trade. In the same era that the Bank of Amsterdam was bringing order to European finance, another quiet but momentous innovation was taking place just a short walk from the bank's doors. This was the creation of the Dutch East India Company, or the VOC. While other companies had existed before, the VOC was structured in a revolutionary new way, one that would lay the groundwork for the modern corporation and the stock market. The business of trading with Asia was incredibly expensive and risky. Building a single large ocean-going vessel, outfitting it with cannons for protection, hiring a crew, and filling its hold with silver coins and goods for trade required an immense amount of capital. A single voyage could take 2 or 3 years to complete, and there was always the risk that a ship might be lost in a storm or to pirates. Previously, ventures like this were financed on a voyage-by-voyage basis by a small group of wealthy merchants. The VOC was created to be something much more permanent. In 1602, the Dutch government granted the VOC a charter, giving it a monopoly on all trade with Asia. To raise the enormous amount of capital needed for such a vast undertaking, the company's directors did something that had never been done on this scale before. They opened a subscription book in Amsterdam and invited the general public to invest. This was not just an invitation for the super rich. Anyone, a prosperous shopkeeper, a skilled artisan, or even a household servant who had saved some money, could come and invest, even a small amount. When a person invested, their name and the amount they contributed were carefully recorded in the company's great ledger. In return, they received a receipt that entitled them to a portion of the company's future profits. This receipt was, in effect, a share of the company. Unlike previous ventures, this was not an investment in a single voyage. It was an investment in the company itself, a permanent stake in all of its future activities, its ships, its warehouses, and its trading posts. The subscription was a huge success, and the VOC raised a vast sum, creating a permanent capital base that allowed it to plan for the long term. This led to another quiet innovation. What if an investor who had bought a share needed their money back before the company paid out its profits? They could not simply withdraw it from the company, as the capital was being used to build ships and fund expeditions. The solution that emerged was simple. The investor could sell their share to someone else. In the coffee houses and on the main bridge near the Amsterdam Bourse, an informal market for these VOC shares quickly developed. A person wishing to sell could find a buyer, and they would agree on a price. The price would depend on the latest news from Asia. If a fleet laden with valuable spices was reported to be on its way home, the price of a share would rise. If a ship was lost, it would fall. Once a price was agreed, the two parties would go to the VOC headquarters to have the ownership of the share officially transferred in the company's ledger. So the Dutch East India Company pioneered the concept of a permanent joint stock company, allowing the public to buy shares and become partial owners. This in turn led to the creation of the first secondary market, where those shares could be freely bought and sold between individuals. In a large, quiet office in Amsterdam, a clerk with a quill pen neatly crosses out one name in a ledger and writes another beside it. The entry is small, but it represents a silent and orderly transfer of ownership, a small piece of a vast global enterprise changing hands, the humble birth of the world's first stock market. The creation of the joint stock company was more than just a new way to raise money. It was a new way of thinking about business itself. It allowed for undertakings on a scale that was previously unimaginable for any single individual or small partnership. This new corporate structure fundamentally changed the nature of international trade, making it a more permanent, strategic, and far-reaching endeavor. Before companies like the VOC, long-distance trade was typically organized around a single voyage. A group of merchants would pool their funds, outfit one or two ships, send them on their way, and then wait. When the ships returned, the profits would be calculated and distributed, and the partnership would be dissolved. The entire process would then have to start from scratch for the next voyage. This made it difficult to engage in any kind of long-term planning. The joint stock company, with its permanent capital, operated very differently. The directors of the VOC could think in terms of decades, not just single voyages. They could use their vast resources to build a lasting infrastructure on the other side of the world. They could establish permanent fortified trading posts, called factories, in places like Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, or on the coast of India. They could build warehouses to store goods, allowing them to buy spices when the price was low after a harvest, and wait to ship them when the price was high. This long-term approach also allowed them to manage risk in a much more sophisticated way. With a large fleet of ships constantly sailing, the loss of a single vessel, while tragic, was not a catastrophic financial blow to the company as a whole. The profits from the many successful voyages would more than cover the losses from the few unsuccessful ones. This resilience gave the company a stability that smaller, voyage-based ventures could never match. Furthermore, the scale of the company allowed it to exert enormous influence. It could negotiate trade agreements with local rulers from a position of great strength. It had its own private army and navy to protect its assets and shipping lanes. It became a state within a state, a vast commercial empire with a permanent presence in Asia, all managed from a quiet set of offices in Amsterdam. This new model was soon copied by other nations. The English formed their own East India Company, and the French, Swedes, and Danes followed suit. The era of the individual merchant adventurer slowly gave way to the age of the great trading companies. International commerce was no longer just a series of disconnected voyages, but a network of permanent global supply chains, all financed by the pooled capital of thousands of anonymous investors back in Europe. In this way, the joint stock company structure transformed international trade from a series of short-term, high-risk ventures into a stable, long-term, and large-scale global enterprise. It created organizations with the capital and the permanence needed to build and manage a truly worldwide commercial network. On a large map spread across a heavy oak table in the VOC headquarters, small flags mark the company's many trading posts across the Indian Ocean. The map represents a vast and complex logistical network, a web of ships and warehouses that spanned half the globe. It is a quiet, visual testament to a new and powerful way of organizing the world of trade. As the 17th century drew to a close, England found itself in a difficult financial position. The government was engaged in a costly war with France and was struggling to raise the money it needed to fund its army and especially its growing navy. Traditional methods of taxation were slow and unpopular, and attempts to borrow large sums from individual private bankers had proven unreliable. In this moment of need, a new and powerful idea took shape, one that would combine the interests of the state with the power of private capital. This was the founding of the Bank of England in 1694. The plan was a grand bargain, a simple but ingenious arrangement. A group of private merchants and financiers proposed to lend the government a very large sum of money, £1.2 million, at a reasonable rate of interest. This was the immediate solution to the government's funding crisis. In exchange for this loan, the government would grant these investors a royal charter, allowing them to form a new joint stock bank. This new entity would be called the Governor and Company of the Bank of England. This was a private institution owned by the shareholders who had subscribed to the initial loan. But it had a unique and privileged relationship with the state. It was not just another bank, it was the government's bank. It would manage the national debt, holding the official record of the government's loan and paying out the interest to the original investors. It also became the place where the government deposited its tax revenues. This close relationship with the state gave the Bank of England an unparalleled reputation for stability and trustworthiness. People knew that the bank's own financial health was directly tied to the financial health of the English government itself. This public confidence allowed the bank to engage in a practice that would become the cornerstone of modern banking, the issuing of banknotes. The bank began to issue paper notes that were, in essence, promises to pay the bearer a certain sum of money in gold or silver coin on demand. A merchant could deposit his gold coins at the Bank of England and receive a bundle of these crisp paper notes in return. These notes were much lighter and more convenient to carry and use for large transactions than heavy sacks of coin. Because everyone trusted that the Bank of England would always honor its promise and exchange the notes for real metal, the notes began to circulate as if they were money themselves. In this way, the Bank of England was created to solve a specific government funding problem. It was a privately owned bank that made a large, permanent loan to the state. In return, it became the government's official banker, a role that gave it the credibility to issue paper banknotes that were widely accepted as a new and convenient form of money. In the main hall of the Bank of England, a clerk with a steady hand signs a newly printed banknote. The paper is thick, the engraving is intricate, and the promise written upon it is clear. This simple object, a piece of paper representing a sum of gold held in the vaults below, is a new kind of money, born from a quiet partnership between private capital and the needs of the state. The creation of the Bank of England marked a turning point in how governments managed their finances. Before this, a king or queen might borrow money for a war, but this was often a personal loan, and future rulers might not feel obligated to repay it. This made lending to the state a risky business. The Bank of England introduced a new, more permanent and impersonal concept, the national debt. The initial loan of £1.2 million made to the English government was not expected to be repaid in a lump sum. Instead, it was converted into a permanent debt. The government simply promised to pay a fixed amount of interest on this debt every year, reliably and without fail. The Bank of England was put in charge of managing this process. It would receive tax revenues from the government and use a portion of those funds to make the regular interest payments to the original investors, or to whoever owned a share of the debt at that time. This created a new and very attractive type of investment. A wealthy individual could lend money to the government, not by giving it directly to the king, but by buying a share of the national debt, which was often referred to as government stock or consols. In return, they would receive a steady, predictable stream of income in the form of interest payments, year after year. Because these payments were guaranteed by the full taxing power of the British government and managed by the reliable Bank of England, this was considered one of the safest investments a person could possibly make. This system had a profound effect. It gave the government access to a much larger and more patient pool of capital than ever before. Whenever the state needed to raise more money, for another war or for a large infrastructure project, it didn't have to seek out a few wealthy bankers. Instead, it could simply issue and sell more of this government stock to the general public through the Bank of England. Thousands of individuals, from great lords to modest merchants, would willingly invest, confident in the security of their returns. This allowed the British state to fund its activities on an unprecedented scale, which became a significant advantage in its long rivalry with other European powers. The national debt was not seen as a sign of weakness, but as a sign of financial strength and stability. It was a demonstration of the government's ability to reliably meet its financial obligations, which in turn fostered a deep sense of public credit and trust. In this way, the Bank of England's primary role evolved into managing the national debt. By converting government borrowing into a safe, tradable investment that paid regular interest, it created a stable and orderly system of public credit. This system provided the state with a reliable source of funding and gave investors a secure way to earn a steady return on their capital. In a quiet, ledger-lined room at the Bank of England, a clerk records an interest payment due to a holder of government stock. The entry is methodical and routine. It is a small part of a vast, silent machinery that ensures the government's promises are kept, a system that turns the abstract concept of national debt into a steady, tangible flow of income for thousands of investors. For thousands of years, the very idea of money had been inseparable from the physical substance of metal. The value of a coin was the value of the gold or silver it contained. But with the rise of modern banking, a quiet and profound transition began to take place. A slow shift from heavy metal to lightweight paper. This was the gradual acceptance of the banknote. The first banknotes, like those issued by the Bank of England, were not seen as money in themselves. They were seen as receipts for money. A person would deposit a certain amount of gold coin at the bank and receive a piece of paper that certified this deposit. The note was a promise from the bank to return the actual gold coins to whoever presented the note at its counter. The value of the paper was entirely dependent on the public's absolute trust that this promise would always be kept. At first, these notes were used mainly by wealthy merchants and financiers for very large transactions. A note might be written out for a large, uneven sum, like £137 corresponding to a specific deposit. But as the practice became more common, banks began to issue notes in standardized round-number denominations, £1, £5, £10. This made them much easier to use for more general payments. The convenience of these notes was undeniable. Instead of carrying a heavy, jingling bag of coins, a person could carry the same amount of purchasing power in a few thin pieces of paper tucked into a wallet. This made commerce quicker and safer. But for this system to work, the public's confidence had to be maintained at all times. The banks had to be very careful. They always needed to keep a sufficient reserve of gold and silver coins in their vaults to be able to redeem any notes that might be brought in for exchange. This practice of keeping only a fraction of deposits on hand in coin is known as fractional reserve banking. This system worked well in normal times. Most people were happy to use the convenient paper notes for their daily business, and only a small number would ever come to the bank to exchange them for metal on any given day. The bank could then lend out a portion of the deposited gold that it was not using, earning interest and stimulating the economy. However, the system was vulnerable to a loss of confidence. If a rumor spread that a bank was in trouble, people might panic and rush to exchange their paper notes for real gold all at once. If enough people did this, the bank's limited reserves could be exhausted, and it would be forced to close its doors, unable to honor its promises. This is what was known as a bank run. Maintaining public trust was therefore the single most important job of any bank that issued notes. So the transition to paper money began with banknotes acting as convenient, transferable receipts for gold or silver held in a bank's vault. The acceptance of these notes as money depended entirely on the public's unwavering belief in the bank's promise to redeem them for metal at any time. In a merchant's office, a thick, leather-bound wallet is opened. Inside, alongside a few silver shillings, are several crisp banknotes from the Bank of England. The merchant selects a £5 note to pay for a shipment of goods. This simple act, exchanging a piece of paper for a physical product, is a quiet demonstration of trust in a system that was slowly changing the very nature of money. Even before the establishment of the Bank of England, the foundations of paper money were being quietly laid in the workshops of London's goldsmiths. In the turbulent years of the mid-17th century, wealthy merchants and landowners grew wary of keeping their fortunes at home or depositing them in the royal mint, which the king had once raided for his own needs. They began to look for a safer place to store their gold and silver, and they found it in the goldsmiths. The goldsmiths were already in the business of valuable materials. They had strong rooms and secure vaults to protect their own stock of precious metals. It was a natural and simple step for them to begin offering this security to others. A merchant could bring a heavy bag of gold coins to a goldsmith's shop for safekeeping. The goldsmith would weigh the gold, record the amount in his ledger, and give the merchant a formal receipt. This receipt was a written promise to return the exact amount of gold to the depositor upon request. At first, these receipts were just that, a claim ticket for a specific deposit. If the merchant needed his money, he would go back to the goldsmith, return the receipt, and get his gold back. But a quiet innovation soon followed. Suppose the merchant needed to pay a debt to another tradesman. Instead of going through the cumbersome process of withdrawing his gold and physically handing it over, he could simply endorse the goldsmith's receipt and give that to his creditor instead. This was a major step. The piece of paper itself began to change hands, acting as a substitute for the metal it represented. The new owner of the receipt could then either go to the goldsmith to claim the gold, or, more likely, use the same receipt to pay another one of his own debts. As long as everyone trusted the goldsmith's signature and his promise to pay, the paper notes could circulate from person to person, settling transactions without any coins ever leaving the goldsmith's vault. These circulating receipts were, in effect, the first private banknotes in England. The goldsmiths soon made another crucial observation. They noticed that on any given day, only a small fraction of their depositors ever came in to demand their gold. The vast majority of the gold simply sat idle in their vaults, while the paper receipts circulated outside. This gave them an idea. They could safely lend out a portion of this dormant gold to other customers who needed credit, charging them interest. They could even make these loans not by handing out physical gold, but simply by issuing more of their own promissory notes. As long as they kept enough gold in reserve to meet the everyday demand for withdrawals, this system was a profitable and sustainable form of business. They had become not just keepers of gold, but true bankers. In this way, the London goldsmiths, through the simple, practical needs of their customers, developed the core principles of modern banking. They provided safe deposits, created a circulating paper currency in the form of their receipts, and began the practice of fractional reserve lending. In the back room of a London goldsmith's shop, the evening light reflects off a neat stack of gold coins in an open vault. Beside it on a desk lies a ledger and a small stack of handwritten promissory notes. These simple tools, metal, paper, and a book of accounts, were the quiet beginnings of a system that would transform the world of finance. As the 18th century unfolded, with its flourishing trade and new forms of money, people began to think about the economy in a more systematic way. The most influential of these thinkers was a quiet Scottish philosopher named Adam Smith. In his landmark book, The Wealth of Nations, he sought to understand the simple underlying principles that govern the complex world of commerce. His ideas were not abstract theories, but calm observations of how ordinary people behaved in their everyday economic lives. At the heart of Smith's thinking was a simple but powerful idea, the invisible hand. He observed that when individuals are left free to pursue their own self-interest in a peaceful and orderly way, they unintentionally end up promoting the good of society as a whole. A baker, for example, does not bake bread out of a general love for his community. He bakes bread because he wants to earn a living to support his own family, but in doing so, he provides the entire neighborhood with fresh bread. A weaver makes cloth not just for the sake of it, but to earn a profit. In the process, she clothes her neighbors. Smith saw this not as a sign of selfishness, but as a natural and beneficial human inclination. He argued that the economy was not a machine that needed a powerful ruler to direct its every move. Instead, it was more like a self-regulating natural system. The millions of individual decisions made by buyers and sellers in the marketplace, each acting in their own interest, would collectively guide resources to where they were most needed, as if directed by an invisible hand. A key part of this system was the idea of the division of labor. Smith famously used the example of a pin factory. He noted that a single unskilled worker trying to make a pin from start to finish, drawing the wire, straightening it, cutting it, sharpening the point, and adding the head, might be able to make only a few pins in a whole day. But if the work was broken down into a series of small, simple, repetitive tasks, with each worker specializing in just one step, a small team of workers could produce thousands of pins a day. This specialization, he argued, was the great engine of productivity and the true source of a nation's wealth. Smith also applied his ideas to trade between nations. The prevailing view at the time, known as mercantilism, saw trade as a form of competition, where one nation's gain was another's loss. Mercantilists believed a country should try to export as much as possible and import as little as possible to accumulate a great hoard of gold and silver. Smith saw this as a mistake. He argued that free trade was mutually beneficial. If Scotland was very good at producing wool, and France was very good at producing wine, it made no sense for Scotland to struggle to grow its own grapes. It was far more efficient for each country to specialize in what it did best, and then freely trade with the other. In this way, both countries would end up with more wool and more wine than they could have produced on their own. In essence, Adam Smith described an economic system that was largely self-organizing. He saw the pursuit of individual interest, the specialization of labor, and the freedom of trade as the simple, quiet forces that naturally led to greater prosperity for all. In a small pin factory, the steady, rhythmic sounds of production fill the air. Each worker performs a single, focused task. The quiet hum of their collective effort, a simple process of specialized labor, is a small-scale illustration of the great, peaceful engine of economic life that Adam Smith so carefully observed and described. The ideas put forward by Adam Smith and other classical economists were not just academic exercises. They had a profound and practical influence on how people thought about money and banking. Their principles of free markets, sound money, and limited government intervention provided a new intellectual framework for the financial world that was emerging. A central belief of classical economics was the importance of sound money. For thinkers like Smith, money was primarily a tool to make the exchange of real goods and services easier. It was the great wheel of circulation. For this wheel to turn smoothly, it needed to be reliable and predictable. This meant that the value of money should be anchored to something tangible and of intrinsic worth. In their era, this meant gold and silver. This belief directly supported the banking system that was already in place. The practice of issuing paper banknotes that were redeemable for a fixed amount of gold or silver was seen as perfectly sensible. It provided the convenience of paper while maintaining the solid, predictable foundation of precious metal. Classical economists saw this as a healthy and efficient system, as long as the banks acted prudently. They believed that the discipline of convertibility, the legal requirement that a bank must exchange its notes for gold on demand, was a vital check on the bank's behavior. It prevented them from irresponsibly printing too many notes, which would devalue the currency and disrupt the calm, natural order of the market. This led to a preference for a system of free banking. In this view, there was no need for a single, powerful central bank to have a monopoly on issuing currency. Instead, many different private banks should be allowed to issue their own unique banknotes, as long as they all promised to redeem them in gold. The belief was that competition and the public's own judgment would be the best regulators. A bank that was known to be well managed and to have large gold reserves would have its notes widely accepted. A bank that was rumored to be reckless would find that its notes were refused by the public, forcing it to either mend its ways or go out of business. The classical view of interest was also a simple and practical one. They saw the interest rate not as something to be set by the government, but as a natural price that emerged from the market. It was the price of borrowing money, determined by the simple interplay of supply and demand. The supply came from people who had saved money and were willing to lend it. The demand came from entrepreneurs and businesses who wanted to borrow that money to invest in new ventures, like building a new factory or outfitting a new ship. The interest rate was simply the point of equilibrium where the desires of savers and the needs of borrowers met. In summary, the early principles of classical economics advocated for a financial system built on quiet stability. They favored a currency firmly backed by gold, a competitive banking system regulated by the discipline of redeemability, and interest rates that were determined by the natural, free-flowing market of savings and investment. Inside a well-run private bank, a customer presents a £5 note at the counter. The clerk, without hesitation, counts out 5 heavy gold sovereign coins and slides them across the polished wood. This simple everyday transaction, the seamless exchange of paper for gold, is the physical embodiment of the classical ideal, a system of money built on a quiet, unwavering promise. As global trade expanded, so did the risks that came with it. A merchant ship setting out on a long voyage was a huge investment, and its loss at sea could be a financial catastrophe for its owner. While no one could prevent storms or other misfortunes, a clever and cooperative system evolved to soften the financial blow of such a loss. This was the birth of the modern insurance market, which began not in a grand hall, but in the modest and convivial atmosphere of a London coffee house. In the late 17th century, a coffee house owned by a man named Edward Lloyd became a popular meeting place for ship captains, merchants, and financiers. It was a place to exchange the latest news from the ports, to hear about the movements of ships, and to conduct business in a calm and informal setting. It was in this environment that a simple and practical system for insuring voyages took shape. A shipowner or merchant who wanted to insure his vessel and its cargo would prepare a detailed document. This document or policy would describe the ship, its captain, its intended route, and the value of the cargo. He, or a broker acting on his behalf, would then circulate this document among the wealthy individuals who frequented Lloyd's coffee house. These individuals, who came to be known as underwriters, were essentially professional risk-takers. Each underwriter would carefully read the policy and assess the risk of the voyage. Was the ship well built and sturdy? Was the captain known to be reliable? Was the route particularly dangerous? Based on this assessment, he would decide if he was willing to take on a portion of the risk. If he was, he would literally write his name under the terms of the policy, a practice that gave us the word underwriter. Next to his signature, he would write the percentage of the total value he was willing to cover, perhaps 5% or 10%. In return for taking on this share of the risk, he would receive a corresponding share of the insurance fee, known as the premium, which the ship owner paid up front. The policy would then be passed from one underwriter to the next, around the tables of the coffee house. Each would add his signature and the amount of risk he was willing to accept, until the entire value of the ship and cargo, 100%, was covered. This process of spreading the risk among many different individuals was the key to the whole system. For the ship owner, it meant his entire venture was protected. For each individual underwriter, it meant that his potential loss was limited to a manageable fraction of the total. If the ship completed its voyage safely, the underwriters would simply keep the premium they had been paid as their profit. If the ship was lost, the underwriters would collectively pay the ship owner the full insured value, with each one contributing the percentage he had agreed to cover. In this way, the informal community at Lloyd's Coffee House created a sophisticated market for managing risk. It was a system based on shared information, expert judgment, and the simple, powerful idea of spreading a large potential loss among a group of many, making the uncertain world of maritime trade a little more predictable. Inside the warm, wood-paneled room of a coffee house, the low hum of conversation fills the air. A broker quietly hands a folded parchment policy to a wealthy underwriter. The underwriter examines it, dips his quill in an inkwell, and signs his name at the bottom of the page. This simple, handwritten signature is a quiet promise, a personal guarantee against the unpredictable dangers of the sea. The development of a formal insurance market had a quiet but transformative effect on the nature of maritime trade. It did not make the seas any safer. Storms and other hazards remained a constant, but it did make the financial side of commerce much more stable and predictable. Insurance was a tool for managing uncertainty, allowing merchants to undertake ambitious voyages with a greater sense of calm and security. Before insurance became common, a merchant who owned a ship was in a very precarious position. His entire fortune might be tied up in a single vessel and its cargo. If that ship went down, he could be financially ruined in an instant. This immense risk naturally made merchants very cautious. They might be hesitant to invest in larger, more expensive ships, or to send them on longer, more profitable, but also more dangerous routes. The fear of a total loss was a constant brake on the growth of trade. Marine insurance changed this calculation completely. By paying a relatively small, predictable fee, the premium, a merchant could transfer the catastrophic financial risk of losing his ship to a group of underwriters. The unpredictable possibility of a huge loss was replaced by the certainty of a small, manageable cost. This was a profound shift. With his investment now protected, a merchant could operate with much greater confidence. He could more easily attract investors to help finance his voyages, as they too knew that their capital was now secure. This led to a gradual increase in the scale of commerce. Merchants were more willing to build bigger ships, to hire larger crews, and to seek out new, more distant markets. The insurance system acted as a quiet enabler of growth and exploration. The process of setting the insurance premium also created a powerful incentive for safety and good practice. The underwriters at Lloyd's were not simply gambling. They were making calculated decisions based on the best available information. A ship that was old or in poor repair would be charged a much higher premium than one that was new and well-maintained. A voyage captained by a man with a reputation for recklessness would be more expensive to insure than one led by a captain known for his skill and prudence. This meant that ship owners had a direct financial reason to invest in safety. By building stronger ships, hiring experienced captains, and choosing safer routes, they could lower their insurance costs. The insurance market, in its quiet, methodical way, helped to promote higher standards throughout the entire shipping industry. It rewarded careful, professional behavior with lower premiums, a simple and effective mechanism for encouraging responsible commerce. In this way, the practice of marine insurance did more than just compensate for losses. It fundamentally changed the financial landscape of trade by making it more predictable. It gave merchants the security they needed to expand their operations and created a system that quietly rewarded and encouraged safer shipping practices. On the desk of a shipping magnate, a signed insurance policy lies next to a map of the Atlantic trade routes. The policy is a simple document, a few pages of parchment covered in neat, handwritten script, and the signatures of a dozen different men. It represents peace of mind. It is a quiet, orderly contract that transforms a great and unpredictable risk into a small and certain cost, allowing the great ships to set sail with confidence. In the late 18th century, as the world of finance grew increasingly complex and interconnected, a new kind of banking dynasty emerged, one that would operate on a truly international scale. The most famous and influential of these was the House of Rothschild. Their story began not in a grand palace, but in the modest Jewish quarter of Frankfurt, with a single astute businessman named Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Mayer Amschel started his career as a dealer in rare coins and antiques. He was known for his diligence, his integrity, and his deep knowledge of his trade. Through this quiet, specialized business, he built up a respectable fortune and, more importantly, a network of valuable connections with wealthy patrons, including European nobles and princes. He saw that the real future, however, lay not just in trading objects, but in finance. The true genius of the Rothschild enterprise was its unique structure, a vision that Mayer Amschel carefully planned and executed. He had 5 sons, and he trained each of them meticulously in the family business. As each son came of age, he did not keep them in Frankfurt. Instead, he sent them out to establish new, semi-independent branches of the family firm in the key financial capitals of Europe. Amschel Mayer remained in Frankfurt to manage the parent house. Solomon went to Vienna, Nathan to London, Kalman to Naples, and Jacob to Paris. This created an unparalleled private intelligence network. The 5 brothers were in constant communication with each other, their letters carried by a private system of couriers that was often faster and more reliable than the official government post. A letter from Nathan in London would arrive at Jacob's desk in Paris, bringing the latest news about British government bond prices. A dispatch from Solomon in Vienna would inform his brothers of the Austrian emperor's financial needs. This constant, confidential flow of information gave them a unique advantage. They always knew what was happening in the major markets before anyone else, allowing them to make calm, well-informed decisions. The 5 houses operated as a close-knit partnership. They were legally separate, but bound by family ties and a shared interest. They would work together to arrange huge loans for governments across Europe. If the Austrian government needed to borrow a large sum, the Vienna House might take the lead, but the other four houses would work together to sell the Austrian government bonds to investors in their respective countries. By spreading the loan across multiple markets, they could raise far larger sums of money than any single bank could have managed on its own. They also became masters of arbitrage, the quiet, low-risk practice of profiting from small differences in the price of the same asset in different markets. With their rapid communication, they would know if the price of a particular government bond was slightly higher in Paris than in London. They could then simultaneously buy the bond in London and sell it in Paris, making a small but certain profit on a huge volume of transactions. In this way, the Rothschild family built a financial empire unlike any that had come before. It was a decentralized yet perfectly coordinated international network, built on the foundations of family loyalty, rapid communication, and a deep understanding of the emerging world of global finance. On a desk in the London office, Nathan Rothschild reads a coded letter just arrived by courier from his brother in Paris. The candlelight flickers on the page as he absorbs the detailed financial information within. The letter is not just a family correspondence. It is a vital piece of a vast private intelligence system, a quiet and powerful tool for navigating the intricate currents of European finance. The rise of powerful international banking networks like the Rothschilds and their counterparts, such as the Baring brothers in London, created a new and organized market for financing the activities of nations. These private banks became the quiet intermediaries between governments that needed to borrow money and the growing class of investors who had capital to lend. Their work brought a new level of order and scale to the world of public finance. When a government needed to raise a large sum of money, perhaps to fund the construction of a new railway line or to recover after a costly war, it would approach one of these major banking houses. The bankers would then begin a careful and methodical process of due diligence. They would analyze the country's finances, its tax revenues, and its political stability to assess the risk of the loan. Based on this analysis, they would negotiate the terms with the government, including the amount of the loan, the interest rate, and the schedule of repayments. Once an agreement was reached, the banking house's real work would begin. They would take the large government loan and divide it up into thousands of small, standardized units called bonds. These bonds were essentially small tradable pieces of the government's debt. The bank would then use its international network of branches and agents to sell these bonds to investors all across Europe. An advertisement might be placed in a London newspaper, and a prospectus would be circulated among the financial community in Paris. A wealthy doctor in Vienna, a retired merchant in Amsterdam, or a landowning aristocrat in the English countryside could all purchase these bonds as a safe, long-term investment. The bank's reputation was the key to this whole process. Investors bought the bonds not just because they trusted the foreign government, but because they trusted the banking house that was underwriting the loan. The bank's name on the bond was a seal of quality, a quiet assurance that the investment had been thoroughly vetted and was sound. For this service, the bank would take a small commission, earning its profit by successfully placing the entire bond issue with the public. This system was not just for governments. As the Industrial Revolution gained momentum, these same banking networks became crucial for financing large-scale industrial projects. The construction of a major railway, for example, required a vast amount of capital up front, far more than a single entrepreneur could provide. A banking house would organize a syndicate to underwrite the stock of the new railway company, selling the shares to its wide network of investors. They were channeling the collected savings of thousands of individuals into the great industrial undertakings that were reshaping the world. In this way, the great private banking networks of the 19th century acted as the central hubs of international capital. They created an orderly, efficient, and trusted global market for governments and new industries to raise the vast sums of money they needed for their long-term projects. In a quiet, wood-paneled office, a banker examines a newly printed government bond certificate. The paper is heavy, the engraving intricate, with the crest of a foreign nation at the top and the discreet signature of the banking house at the bottom. This single piece of paper is a tangible link in a vast financial chain, connecting the savings of a private citizen to the ambitions of a distant state. In the latter half of the 19th century, as global trade and investment reached unprecedented levels, the world's major economies adopted a system designed to create a calm and predictable international monetary environment. This was the classical gold standard. It was not a formal treaty signed by nations, but rather a shared commitment to a simple set of rules. With Great Britain and the Bank of England at its center, the core principle of the gold standard was straightforward. Each country that adhered to it made a simple promise. It defined the value of its currency in terms of a fixed quantity of gold. The British government, for example, defined the pound sterling as being worth a specific weight of gold. The United States government did the same for the dollar, and the French government did the same for the franc, and so on. This created a system of fixed exchange rates between all the major currencies. Because the British pound was worth a certain amount of gold, and the US dollar was also worth a certain amount of gold, the exchange rate between the pound and the dollar was effectively fixed. It was a simple matter of comparing their respective gold values. This removed a major source of uncertainty from international trade. A British merchant selling cloth to a buyer in America knew exactly how many dollars he would need to receive to equal the value of his pounds back home. The second crucial rule of the gold standard was that each country's central bank had to guarantee that it would exchange its paper banknotes for gold at this fixed rate to anyone who asked at any time. This was the anchor of the whole system. The amount of paper money a country could print was therefore disciplined by the amount of gold it held in its reserves. A government couldn't simply print more money to pay its bills, because this would risk a situation where it couldn't honor its promise to redeem those notes for gold. This discipline created a powerful check against inflation and fostered a deep sense of trust in the value of each nation's currency. The system also had a quiet, automatic mechanism for keeping trade between countries in balance. If, for example, Britain began to import much more from France than it exported, a large outflow of British pounds would end up in French hands. French merchants would then present these pounds to the Bank of England to be exchanged for gold. This would cause the Bank of England's gold reserves to shrink. To protect its reserves, the Bank of England would raise its interest rates. This would make borrowing money in Britain more expensive, which would gently slow down the British economy, reducing its demand for French imports. At the same time, the gold flowing into France would allow the French central bank to lower its interest rates, stimulating its economy. This gentle, automatic adjustment would continue until the trade between the two countries came back into balance. So the international gold standard was a system where countries fixed the value of their currencies to a specific amount of gold. This created stable exchange rates and disciplined the creation of money, fostering an environment of remarkable price stability and predictability for the global economy. In the deep, silent vault of a central bank, gold bars are stacked in neat, gleaming rows. Each bar is stamped with its weight and purity. This vast, silent hoard of metal is not just a treasure. It is the physical foundation of the nation's currency, the quiet, tangible anchor for a global system of monetary order. The era of the classical gold standard, from roughly 1870 to the start of the First World War, is often remembered as a period of remarkable economic calm and integration. The system of fixed exchange rates and sound money created a uniquely predictable environment, which in turn fostered a massive expansion of global trade and investment. It was an age of quiet confidence in the world of international finance. For a business involved in importing or exporting, the gold standard removed one of the biggest and most troubling sources of uncertainty: currency risk. Imagine a German machine manufacturer who agrees to sell a piece of equipment to a factory in Argentina. The price is agreed upon in Argentine pesos, but the payment will not be received for 90 days after the machine has been shipped and installed. Without a gold standard, the value of the peso relative to the German mark could change significantly during those 3 months. A sudden drop in the peso's value could wipe out the German manufacturer's entire profit. The gold standard eliminated this worry. Because both the German mark and the Argentine peso were fixed to a specific weight of gold, Their exchange rate was stable and predictable. The manufacturer knew, with a very high degree of certainty, exactly how many marks his pesos would be worth in 3 months' time. This stability made businesses far more willing to engage in long-term international contracts. It was like building a solid, permanent bridge between different national economies. This same sense of predictability was a powerful encouragement for international investment. The late 19th century was a period of enormous capital flows, particularly from the established industrial nations of Europe to the developing regions of the world, like North and South America and Australia. British investors, for example, financed the construction of thousands of miles of railways in the United States. They were willing to make these huge long-term investments because the gold standard gave them confidence that the future profits and interest payments, denominated in US dollars, could be reliably converted back into British pounds at the familiar, fixed exchange rate. The system created a single, integrated global capital market. A government or a company in a country like Brazil that needed to raise money could issue bonds not just to its own citizens, but to investors in London, Paris, and Berlin. Savings from one part of the world could flow smoothly and efficiently to another part of the world where they were most needed, all facilitated by this common, gold-based monetary language. The result was a period of unprecedented growth in the global infrastructure of trade, railways, canals, ports, and telegraph lines, all knitted together by this quiet, orderly financial system. In this way, the gold standard acted as the stable and reliable bedrock for the first great age of globalization. By providing a common monetary measure and eliminating the uncertainty of fluctuating exchange rates, it gave merchants and investors the confidence they needed to trade and invest across borders on a massive scale. In the telegraph office of a London bank, the quiet clatter of a machine fills the room as a message arrives from New York. The message confirms a large transfer of funds, a transaction that crosses the Atlantic in mere moments. This simple exchange of information is made possible by the underlying confidence of a shared monetary standard, a quiet global agreement that made the world of finance seem both smaller and more orderly. The Industrial Revolution was a period of profound and quiet transformation, not just in the way goods were made, but in the way that the making of those goods was financed. The new machines and factories of the late 18th and 19th centuries were on a scale never seen before. A steam engine, a mechanical loom, or an entire iron foundry required a huge amount of money up front, long before any profits could be realized. This created a massive and growing demand for a new kind of finance, long-term investment credit. In the early days of industrialization, the money for these projects often came from local, informal sources. An ambitious entrepreneur with a plan for a new cotton mill might gather the initial capital from his own savings, from his extended family, and from a small circle of wealthy local partners. He might approach a prosperous local landowner or a successful merchant, show them his plans and his carefully calculated cost estimates, and persuade them to invest in his venture. These relationships were built on personal reputation and trust. As the scale of industry grew, however, these informal networks were no longer enough. The banking system itself began to adapt. The traditional role of many banks had been to provide short-term credit to merchants to finance the movement of goods. But now they began to get involved in providing longer-term loans to industrialists. A new type of industrial bank emerged, particularly in countries like Germany and Belgium. These banks would not just lend money to a new factory. They would often become long-term partners in the enterprise, sometimes even taking a seat on the company's board of directors. They would use their own expertise to assess the technical and commercial viability of a project before committing their funds. The development of the joint stock company, with its ability to sell shares to the public, was another crucial piece of the puzzle. This allowed the vast cost of a new railway or a new steelworks to be broken down into thousands of small, affordable units. A growing middle class, with its own modest savings, could now participate in the financing of industry. They might buy a few shares in a new canal company, becoming part owner of a great and tangible piece of infrastructure. The stock exchanges in London, Paris, and New York became the central meeting points where the savings of the many were channeled into the large-scale projects of the few. The banking system acted as the essential intermediary in this whole process, Banks would help new companies to organize their initial stock offerings. They would provide loans to investors who wanted to buy shares. And they would offer accounts and payment services to the industrial companies themselves, managing their payrolls and handling their receipts. They were the quiet, essential plumbing of the industrial economy, ensuring a smooth and orderly flow of capital from those who had it to those who could put it to productive use. In summary, the vast capital needs of the Industrial Revolution were met by a combination of personal networks, the evolution of specialized industrial banks, and the power of the joint stock company. This created a new financial ecosystem capable of gathering and directing the enormous sums of money required for long-term industrial investment. In the flickering gaslight of a banker's office, an industrialist unrolls a large, detailed architectural drawing of a new factory. The two men sit together, quietly discussing the figures written in the margins, the cost of the bricks, the price of the steam engine, the projected output. This calm, methodical conversation is the unseen starting point, the financial blueprint for a project that will soon transform the landscape and the economy of the entire region. While industrial banks and stock markets were financing the grand projects of the age, another, quieter side of the financial world was also expanding to meet the everyday needs of a growing economy. This was the steady growth of commercial banking, a system that served not just the great industrialists, but the vast network of smaller businesses and the general public that made up the fabric of the new urban society. As towns grew into cities, the number of shopkeepers, merchants, and small-scale manufacturers multiplied. These businesses had their own distinct financial needs. They didn't need huge, long-term loans for factories, but they did need a safe place to deposit their daily cash receipts. They needed a way to make payments to their suppliers in other towns. And they often needed short-term loans or overdrafts to manage their cash flow. For example, to buy a new stock of inventory before they had sold the old one. In response to these needs, a dense network of local commercial banks sprang up across the country. In nearly every provincial town, a solid, respectable-looking bank building would occupy a prime spot on the high street. These were often local institutions, founded by a group of the town's most prominent and trusted citizens. The bank manager was a well-known figure in the community, and his business was built on his deep, personal knowledge of his customers and their businesses. The services they offered were simple, practical, and orderly. A shopkeeper would bring his takings at the end of the day, and the sum would be carefully counted and credited to his account in a large, leather-bound passbook. If he needed to pay a supplier in a distant city, he could buy a banker's draft, a secure and trusted form of payment that was the forerunner of the modern check. This was a much safer and more convenient option than sending a large amount of cash through the post. As the 19th century progressed, the practice of using personal checks became more common. A business owner could simply write out a check to a supplier, who could then deposit it in his own bank. The two banks would then settle the payment between themselves through a centralized system known as a clearinghouse. In a quiet, dedicated building in London, clerks from all the different banks would meet each day. They would sit at their designated desks and exchange all the checks that had been drawn on each other's banks. At the end of the day, they would tally up the totals. Instead of moving vast amounts of coin, only the net difference between what a bank owed and what it was owed would be settled, usually through a single transfer at the Bank of England. This was a remarkably efficient and quiet system for processing millions of individual transactions. In this way, commercial banking provided the essential, everyday financial infrastructure for the industrial age. It gave businesses a secure place for their funds, an efficient way to make payments, and access to the short-term credit they needed to operate smoothly, while the clearinghouse system allowed for the seamless settlement of countless daily transactions. Behind the brass grill of a local bank counter, a clerk with a neat, practiced hand makes an entry in a customer's passbook. The stamp of the bank press makes a solid, reassuring sound. This simple, routine interaction is part of a vast and trusted network that kept the daily commerce of a nation moving in a quiet, orderly, and predictable rhythm. After the American Revolution, the new United States faced a series of quiet but significant practical challenges. The young nation had a large war debt to manage, and its monetary system was a confusing patchwork. Coins from Spain, Britain, and France circulated alongside paper notes of varying reliability issued by the 13 individual states. There was a clear and pressing need for a more orderly and unified financial system. In response to this need, the nation's first Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, proposed a plan modeled on the successful Bank of England. This was the creation of a national bank, the first bank of the United States, chartered in 1791. It was designed to be a central stabilizing force for the country's finances. The bank was a public-private partnership. It was a private corporation, owned by shareholders, but the federal government was its largest single shareholder and its primary customer. The bank's headquarters was a handsome and solid stone building in Philadelphia. From this center, it performed several crucial and methodical functions. First, it acted as the government's fiscal agent. Tax revenues were deposited into the bank, and the bank, in turn, made payments on behalf of the government, such as paying interest on the national debt. This created a centralized and efficient system for managing public funds. Second, the bank issued its own paper banknotes. These notes were accepted as payment for all federal taxes and were redeemable in gold and silver coin at any of the bank's branches. Because of this solid backing and official status, the bank's notes became a trusted and uniform national currency, circulating throughout all the states and making commerce between them a much smoother affair. Finally, the bank had a quiet regulatory influence over the many smaller state-chartered banks. It would regularly receive the notes of these state banks as deposits. It would then present these notes back to the state banks, asking for them to be redeemed in gold or silver. This simple, routine act encouraged the state banks to be prudent and to not issue more paper notes than they could safely back with real metal. The idea of a powerful central bank was not without its critics. There were different perspectives on whether such an institution was the best path for the new republic. Some preferred a more decentralized system, with financial power remaining at the state and local level. This quiet debate over the proper role of a central bank would be a recurring theme in American history. When the first bank's charter expired after 20 years, it was not renewed. However, the financial difficulties that followed soon demonstrated the value of a national institution, leading to the creation of a very similar second bank of the United States a few years later. So the first national banks of the United States were established to bring order and stability to the new nation's economy. They managed the government's finances, provided a reliable national currency, and helped to create a more predictable banking system. Inside the main hall of the First Bank of the United States, a clerk sits at a tall wooden desk. He carefully inspects a stack of freshly printed banknotes, each one engraved with intricate patterns to prevent counterfeiting. These simple pieces of paper were objects of order, designed to weave a vast and diverse collection of state economies into a single unified commercial fabric. As the American economy grew in size and complexity throughout the 19th century, the sheer volume of daily transactions became immense. While banknotes were a convenient substitute for coins, an even more efficient and personal method of payment became increasingly popular, especially for businesses. This was the bank check. The check was a wonderfully simple tool. It was a written instruction, a personal note from a depositor to their bank, authorizing the bank to pay a specific sum of money from their account to another person or business. This innovation shifted the creation of payment instruments from the bank to the individual customer. Instead of carrying a wallet full of pre-printed banknotes, a person could now carry a small, empty checkbook and create a payment for any exact amount, right at the point of sale. The journey of a single check illustrates the quiet, orderly system that grew up around it. Imagine a hardware store owner in New York City who buys a shipment of tools from a manufacturer. He writes a check for the agreed-upon amount and gives it to the manufacturer's representative. The manufacturer then takes this check and deposits it into his own bank account, perhaps at a different bank across town. Now, the manufacturer's bank has a piece of paper that is a claim on the hardware store owner's bank. In the early days, the process of settling this claim could be a bit cumbersome. A clerk, known as a runner from the manufacturer's bank, would have to physically walk over to the hardware store owner's bank, present the check, and collect the payment in cash. As the city grew and the number of banks and checks multiplied, this became increasingly inefficient, with runners from dozens of banks crisscrossing the city all day long. To solve this problem, the banks came together and created a central meeting place to settle their accounts. This was the clearinghouse. The New York Clearinghouse, established in the 1850s, was a model of quiet efficiency. Each day, every member bank would send a clerk to the clearinghouse at a designated time. The clerk would bring with him all the checks his bank had received that were drawn on the other member banks, all neatly bundled and sorted. In a large, quiet room, the clerks would take their seats at their assigned desks. In a methodical process that took less than an hour, they would exchange all the bundles of checks. At the end of this exchange, a balance would be struck for each bank. A bank might have brought in $100,000 worth of checks drawn on other banks, and other banks might have brought in $95,000 worth of checks drawn on it. This bank would be a net creditor of $5,000 for the day. Another bank might be a net debtor. Once these final balances were calculated, the entire day's transactions for the whole city could be settled with just a few simple transfers of funds between the clearinghouse and the banks. So the bank check provided a flexible and personal way to make payments. The clearinghouse then created a highly efficient, centralized system for all the banks in a city to settle the millions of transactions represented by these checks in a calm and orderly manner. Inside a grand, high-ceilinged room, the only sounds are the soft rustle of paper and the low murmur of clerks calling out figures. Bundles of checks are passed from desk to desk in a well-rehearsed, silent choreography. This simple daily ritual is the unseen heart of the city's commerce. A quiet process that allows the vast and complex flow of money to be settled with remarkable ease and precision. Throughout the 19th century, the American banking system operated in a decentralized way. While efficient in many respects, this system had a recurring vulnerability. It was prone to periods of financial instability known as panics. During a panic, a piece of bad news could cause depositors to lose confidence and rush to withdraw their cash from the banks. Because banks only held a fraction of their deposits in reserve, even a healthy bank could be forced to close if enough people demanded their money all at once. There was no central institution that could step in to provide emergency funds and calm the situation. After a particularly severe panic in 1907, a broad consensus emerged that the nation needed a more stable and flexible banking system. This led to a long and careful period of study and debate, culminating in the passage of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. This act created the Federal Reserve System, a new central bank for the United States, designed to provide a quiet, steadying hand for the nation's financial life. The structure of the Federal Reserve was a uniquely American compromise, a balance between central authority and regional representation. Instead of a single central bank in Washington, D.C. or New York, the system was built around 12 independent regional Federal Reserve banks, located in major cities across the country, from Boston to San Francisco. Overseeing this network was a board of governors in Washington. This decentralized structure was intended to ensure that the economic needs and perspectives of all parts of the vast country were taken into account. The Federal Reserve was given several key responsibilities, all aimed at creating a more orderly monetary environment. One of its primary original purposes was to act as a lender of last resort. This meant that if a private commercial bank was facing a sudden, large demand for withdrawals and was running low on cash, it could turn to its regional Federal Reserve Bank for a short-term loan. By pledging some of its own assets, like business loans, as collateral, the commercial bank could get the cash it needed to meet its depositors' demands and ride out the temporary storm. This function acted as a vital safety net designed to prevent the bank runs that had plagued the earlier era. The Federal Reserve also took over the task of issuing the nation's currency. The new Federal Reserve notes, backed by the assets of the central bank, became the standard, uniform paper money of the United States. This created a more elastic currency. During times of high economic activity, when more money was needed for transactions, such as during the harvest season in agricultural areas, the Federal Reserve could expand the amount of currency in circulation. During quieter times, it could contract it. This was a move away from the rigid link to gold and towards a more managed and flexible money supply. In essence, the Federal Reserve was created to be a bank for banks. It was designed to provide stability to the financial system, to furnish a flexible currency, and to act as a lender of last resort in times of stress, all with the goal of fostering a calmer and more reliable economic climate. In the quiet, marble-halled interior of a regional Federal Reserve bank, a shipment of newly printed currency is carefully counted and bundled. The notes are crisp and uniform. These simple pieces of paper represent a new approach to money, one based not just on the promise of gold, but on the full faith and credit of a central institution designed to be a permanent and steadying presence in the nation's financial life. Over time, the role of the Federal Reserve, like that of other central banks around the world, evolved beyond its original functions. While providing financial stability remained a core objective, a new and equally important mandate emerged: the active management of the nation's economy, with the goals of maintaining stable prices and promoting maximum employment. This marked a significant shift from the more passive, automatic system of the gold standard to a more hands-on, discretionary approach. The central bank's primary tool for carrying out this mandate is its ability to influence interest rates. It does this not by issuing direct orders, but through a series of quiet, subtle, and indirect actions that ripple through the entire financial system. The most important of these is the setting of a target for a key short-term interest rate, the rate at which commercial banks lend to each other overnight. When the Federal Reserve wants to cool down an economy where prices are rising too quickly, that is, to manage inflation, it will act to raise this target interest rate. A higher interest rate for overnight borrowing between banks makes it more expensive for the banks themselves to get funds. They, in turn, pass this higher cost on to their own customers. The interest rates on mortgages for home buyers, on loans for businesses wanting to expand, and on credit cards for consumers all begin to drift gently upwards. This has a calming effect on the economy. With borrowing now more expensive, people and businesses tend to borrow and spend less. A family might decide to postpone buying a new car. A company might delay the construction of a new warehouse. This reduced level of spending and investment gently eases the pressure on the economy's resources, which in turn helps to slow down the rate at which prices are rising. Conversely, if the economy is slow and unemployment is high, the Federal Reserve will do the opposite. It will act to lower its target interest rate. This makes it cheaper for banks to borrow, and they pass these savings on to their customers. Lower interest rates on mortgages and business loans act as an encouragement to spend and invest. A lower mortgage rate might make a new home more affordable for a young family. A lower business loan rate might make it profitable for a company to build that new warehouse and hire more workers. This gentle encouragement of economic activity helps to promote employment. This process is a delicate balancing act. The members of the Federal Reserve's board and its regional bank presidents meet regularly to analyze a vast amount of economic data: employment numbers, retail sales figures, manufacturing output, and, of course, the latest inflation readings. Based on this calm and methodical assessment of the economy's health, they make their quiet, collective decision on whether to nudge interest rates up, down, or keep them steady. In this way, the modern central bank's mandate is to use its influence over interest rates as a quiet and steady tool. It seeks to lean gently against the prevailing economic winds, raising rates to prevent the economy from overheating, and lowering them to provide support when it is weak, all in the pursuit of a stable and predictable financial environment. In a quiet, wood-paneled boardroom, a group of economists and governors sit around a large, polished table. They review charts and reports, their discussion calm and measured. The decision they reach will not be a loud decree, but a subtle adjustment in a single interest rate, a quiet signal that will slowly and gently influence the course of the entire national economy. As the Second World War drew to a close, leaders from the Allied nations gathered in the quiet mountain resort of Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their purpose was a practical and forward-looking one: to design a new international monetary system that would avoid the economic instability of the previous decades and foster a peaceful, prosperous global economy. The result of their careful deliberations was the Bretton Woods Agreement, a new framework for managing the world's money. The system they created was, in many ways, a modified version of the old gold standard. It was an attempt to get the benefits of the gold standard stability while allowing for a bit more flexibility. At the very center of this new system was the United States dollar. The U.S. government made a firm and simple promise to the world's other central banks. It would maintain the value of the dollar at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce of gold. Any foreign central bank holding U.S. dollars could, at any time, present those dollars to the U.S. Treasury and have them exchanged for physical gold at this fixed price. All the other major countries that joined the system then made a similar promise, but instead of linking their currencies directly to gold, they linked them to the U.S. dollar. The government of Japan, for example, would set a fixed exchange rate, or par value, for the yen against the dollar. The government of Germany would do the same for the Deutschmark, and the government of Britain would do the same for the pound. This created a gold exchange standard. The U.S. dollar was the system's anchor, the only currency directly convertible to gold. All other currencies were then pegged to the dollar at stable, predictable rates. This brought back the familiar, calm environment of fixed exchange rates that had been so beneficial for international trade before the First World War. A French exporter selling wine to a customer in Australia knew that the value of the Australian dollar, relative to the French franc, would remain steady because both were pegged to the U.S. dollar. However, the Bretton Woods system included an important element of flexibility that the old gold standard had lacked. If a country found that its fixed exchange rate was causing persistent economic problems, for example, a prolonged trade deficit, it was not locked in forever. After consulting with a newly created international body, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, the country could be permitted to make a formal, orderly adjustment to its currency's par value. This was known as a revaluation, or a devaluation. This adjustable peg was designed to provide a safety valve, allowing the system to adapt to changing economic realities without collapsing. So the Bretton Woods Agreement established a new international monetary system for the post-war world. It was a gold exchange standard, with the U.S. dollar fixed to gold at its center and all other member currencies pegged to the dollar at stable but adjustable rates. In a quiet, secure room at the United States Bullion Depository at Fort Knox, gold bars are stacked neatly from floor to ceiling. This silent, immense reserve of gold was the physical foundation of the entire post-war global economy. It was the quiet, tangible promise that gave the U.S. dollar, and by extension the whole Bretton Woods system, its credibility and strength. The architects of the Bretton Woods system understood that a set of rules for exchange rates was not enough on its own. To ensure the long-term health and stability of the global economy, they needed permanent institutions to oversee the system and to help countries navigate economic challenges. Out of this practical need, two quiet but enduring international organizations were born: the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank. The International Monetary Fund was created to be the guardian of the new system of fixed exchange rates. Its primary role was to be a supervisor and a cooperative resource for its member countries. Each member country contributed a certain amount of its own currency in gold to a central pool of funds held by the IMF. This pool of resources was then available to help countries that were experiencing temporary economic difficulties. For example, if a country was facing a short-term balance of payments problem, meaning it was spending more foreign currency than it was earning, it could turn to the IMF for a loan. This was not a handout, but a temporary support mechanism. The loan would give the country the foreign currency it needed to stabilize its own currency and to make necessary adjustments to its economy, all without having to resort to disruptive measures like devaluing its currency or restricting trade. The IMF would provide this assistance along with calm, technical advice on how the country could bring its economy back into a sustainable balance. The IMF also oversaw any requests from countries to make a formal adjustment to their exchange rate, ensuring that such changes were made in an orderly and cooperative way. While the IMF was focused on the short-term stability of the monetary system, the second institution, the World Bank, was created with a longer-term goal in mind. Its official name was the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and that name perfectly described its original purpose. In the immediate aftermath of the war, its primary task was to provide long-term, low-interest loans to help finance the rebuilding of the shattered economies of Europe and Japan. The World Bank would raise the money for these loans by selling its own bonds to private investors on the global capital markets. Because the bank's bonds were backed by the guarantees of all its member governments, they were considered an extremely safe investment. The bank would then lend this money out for specific, tangible projects: the rebuilding of a port, the construction of a new power plant, or the modernization of a railway system. The focus was on solid, productive infrastructure that would form the foundation for a country's long-term economic recovery and growth. As the post-war reconstruction was completed, the World Bank's focus gradually shifted to providing similar long-term development loans to poorer nations around the world. So alongside the new system of exchange rates, the Bretton Woods Conference created two sister institutions. The IMF was designed to promote short-term monetary stability and cooperation, while the World Bank was designed to provide long-term financing for reconstruction and development. In a quiet, modern office building in Washington, D.C., a team of economists at the World Bank reviews a detailed proposal for a new irrigation project in a developing country. They examine maps, cost estimates, and engineering reports. This calm, methodical analysis is the first step in a long and quiet process of channeling global savings into the essential, foundational projects of economic life. For a quarter of a century after the Second World War, the Bretton Woods system provided a predictable framework for the global economy. The U.S. dollar, anchored to gold, was the stable center around which all other currencies revolved. However, by the late 1960s, the quiet foundations of this system began to show signs of strain. The world had changed. The economies of countries like Germany and Japan had recovered magnificently and were now major exporting powerhouses. This meant that huge quantities of U.S. dollars were flowing out of America and accumulating in the vaults of foreign central banks. At the same time, the United States was spending vast sums of money abroad, both on domestic social programs and on the Vietnam War. This led to a situation where the number of dollars held by foreign central banks was growing much faster than the size of the U.S. gold reserve held at Fort Knox. This created a quiet but growing credibility problem. Other countries began to wonder if the U.S. could actually honor its promise to exchange all of these foreign-held dollars for gold at the fixed price of $35 an ounce. The amount of paper claims on the gold was beginning to far outweigh the actual amount of physical gold available. Some countries, particularly France, began to openly express their concern and started to present their dollars to the U.S. Treasury to be redeemed for gold, a perfectly legal action under the rules of the system. This put the U.S. in a difficult position. If this trend continued, its gold reserves would be steadily drained away. The pressure mounted, and in August of 1971, the U.S. government made a momentous and quiet announcement. It was unilaterally and temporarily suspending the convertibility of the dollar into gold. This event, which became known as the Nixon shock, effectively severed the last remaining link between the world's major currencies and a physical commodity. The anchor of the Bretton Woods system was gone. After a few years of attempting to create a new system of fixed exchange rates without the gold backing, the world's major economies gradually shifted to the system we have today, a system of floating exchange rates. This meant the end of an era. For the first time in history, all of the world's major currencies became what are known as fiat currencies. The word fiat comes from the Latin for "let it be done." A fiat currency is money that has value not because it is made of or backed by a precious metal, but simply because the government that issues it declares it to be legal tender, and because the people who use it have a shared faith and trust in its stability. The value of a dollar, a yen, or a euro is no longer based on a weight of gold, but on the perceived strength and stability of the economy and the government that stands behind it. In this way, the long historical journey from money as a physical object to money as a shared social convention was completed. The Bretton Woods system ended when the link between the U.S. dollar and gold was formally closed, leading the world into a new era of purely fiat currencies. A single, crisp US dollar bill rests on a table. Its value is no longer connected to the silent bars of gold in a vault. It is an abstract promise, its worth determined by a complex and ever-shifting balance of economic forces and, most importantly, by the quiet, collective trust of the millions of people who accept it in exchange for real goods and services every day. In a world of fiat currencies, the question of what gives money its value becomes a little more abstract. Yet it is rooted in some very simple and practical realities. With no gold backing, the value of a modern banknote or a digital entry in a bank account rests on a quiet, shared foundation of trust. This trust has several distinct and interconnected layers. First, and most fundamentally, we accept money because we trust that other people will also accept it. A baker accepts a $5 bill for a loaf of bread not because the piece of paper itself is valuable, but because she is confident that she can take that same $5 bill to the butcher and exchange it for meat, and that the butcher, in turn, can use it to pay his electricity bill. Money works because it is a network of shared belief. It is a social convention, a useful tool that everyone in a society has quietly agreed to use as a common measure of value and a medium of exchange. The second layer of trust is in the institution that issues and manages the money, the nation's central bank and its government. We trust that the central bank will act as a responsible steward of the currency. We have a shared expectation that it will not suddenly start printing vast, unlimited quantities of new money, which would rapidly devalue the money already in our pockets. The value of a currency is therefore a reflection of the public's confidence in the central bank's commitment to keeping prices stable. The bank's reputation for prudent, predictable, and independent decision-making is one of its most important assets. This is closely linked to a third layer of trust, which is faith in the overall stability and productive capacity of the country's economy. A currency issued by a country with a stable government, a consistent rule of law, and a dynamic and productive economy is generally seen as more reliable and valuable than a currency from a country with political instability and a weak economy. The real goods and services that a country produces, its factories, its farms, its technology, its skilled workforce, form the quiet, tangible backing for the value of its money. The currency is, in a sense, a claim on that vast pool of real economic output. Finally, there is a simple, practical reason why a fiat currency has value. The government declares that it is legal tender and requires that it be used to pay taxes. The fact that you must acquire a certain amount of the national currency each year to settle your tax obligations creates a constant and fundamental demand for that currency, giving it a baseline of real-world utility and value. So, modern money derives its value not from a physical commodity, but from a web of trust. It is a combination of our faith in its acceptance by others, our confidence in the institutions that manage it, our belief in the underlying strength of the economy, and its official status as the required means of paying taxes. A person at a farmer's market hands a $20 bill to a vendor in exchange for a basket of fresh vegetables. The exchange is smooth and effortless. This simple transaction, repeated millions of times a day, is a quiet affirmation of the entire system. It is a small, everyday act of collective faith in a piece of paper that, through our shared trust, becomes a powerful and indispensable tool of modern economic life. In the second half of the 20th century, the physical nature of money began to change once again. The long, slow transition from metal coins to paper notes was followed by an even quieter and more profound shift, the move towards electronic payments. The first widely adopted instrument of this new era was the credit card. The idea behind the credit card was a simple extension of a long-standing practice. For decades, some large department stores and gasoline companies had issued their own charge plates to their regular, trusted customers. These were small metal plates that allowed a customer to make a purchase and be billed for it later. The modern credit card took this idea and made it universal. Instead of being limited to a single store, a single card issued by a bank could be used at thousands of different businesses. The first general-purpose credit cards emerged in the 1950s. They were simple pieces of cardboard or plastic with the customer's name and account number. The process of making a transaction was entirely manual. A shopkeeper would look at the card, perhaps check the name against a list of known bad accounts, and then fill out a paper sales slip. The customer would sign the slip, and the shopkeeper would send this piece of paper to the card-issuing bank to receive payment. The true revolution in electronic payments came with the introduction of the magnetic stripe on the back of the card in the 1970s. This thin, dark stripe was a marvel of quiet data storage. It could hold all the necessary information about the customer's account in a secure, machine-readable format. This innovation, combined with the development of computerized point-of-sale terminals and telephone networks, made the payment process almost instantaneous. Now, when a customer presented their card, the shopkeeper would swipe it through a small reader. The terminal would read the information on the magnetic stripe and send an electronic message through the phone lines to the bank that had issued the card. This message was a simple authorization request. Does this account exist? Is it in good standing? And does it have enough available credit to cover this purchase? In a matter of seconds, a computer at the bank's data center would check the account and send a message back, either approved or declined. If approved, the transaction would be recorded, and the terminal would print a receipt for the customer to sign. The entire process was a silent, invisible conversation between machines, a far cry from the days of heavy coins or even handwritten checks. At the end of the day, the shopkeeper's terminal would send a batch of all the approved transactions to the bank. The bank would then credit the shopkeeper's account for the total amount, minus a small transaction fee. The bank, in turn, would add the purchase amount to the cardholder's monthly statement. The money itself never physically moved at the point of sale. The entire system was based on the secure, orderly transfer of information. So the credit card, particularly with the addition of the magnetic stripe, represented a major shift towards electronic payments. It created a system where transactions could be authorized and recorded almost instantly, through a silent, digital exchange of information between the merchant, the bank, and the customer's account. At a checkout counter, a plastic card is swiped through a small, quiet machine. A gentle beep confirms the transaction is approved. This simple, everyday action is a routine part of modern life, but it represents a profound change in the long history of money, a moment where a physical payment becomes a silent, invisible flow of digital data. Alongside the rise of electronic payments at the checkout counter, another quiet innovation was fundamentally changing the way people interacted with their own bank accounts. This was the arrival of the automated teller machine, or ATM. For the first time, the routine and essential task of getting cash was no longer confined to the opening hours of a physical bank branch. The first ATMs, which appeared in the late 1960s, were simple single-function machines. They were often built into the outside wall of a bank, and their sole purpose was to dispense a standard packet of cash. The process was entirely mechanical. A customer would insert a special paper voucher or a plastic card with a series of holes punched in it. The machine would read the voucher, and if it was valid, a mechanism inside would push out a single envelope containing a fixed amount of money, perhaps £10. The true breakthrough came with the combination of the plastic card with a magnetic stripe and the requirement of a personal identification number, or PIN. This created a secure and automated system for verifying a customer's identity. The magnetic stripe held the account information, and the PIN, a secret number known only to the customer, was the key that unlocked access to the account. The ATM itself was a marvel of simple, robust engineering. It was essentially a computer terminal connected to a safe. When a customer inserted their card and correctly entered their PIN, the machine's internal computer would establish a secure data connection with the bank's central computer, often over a dedicated phone line. The customer would then use a simple keypad and screen to select a transaction, such as withdraw cash, and enter the desired amount. The bank's central computer would instantly check the customer's account balance. If there were sufficient funds, it would send an approval message back to the ATM and simultaneously deduct the withdrawal amount from the customer's account in its main ledger. This digital part of the transaction took only a few seconds. Upon receiving the approval, the ATM's physical mechanism would whir into action. Inside the machine's secure safe, a series of rubber rollers and sensors would begin to pick and count individual banknotes from stacks or cassettes of different denominations. The machine would carefully count out the exact amount requested, one bill at a time. The stack of notes would then be pushed through a slot to the waiting customer. The entire process, from inserting the card to receiving the cash, was a seamless and quiet integration of digital verification and mechanical dispensing. This simple, reliable machine had a profound effect on personal banking routines. The need to visit a bank teller during a limited window of time on weekdays was suddenly gone. People could access their cash whenever they needed it, at night, on a weekend, or on a public holiday. The ATM provided a new level of convenience and autonomy, a quiet and private way to manage one of the most basic and essential parts of one's financial life. In this way, the ATM used technology to automate and extend the most common banking function. By combining a secure card and PIN with a reliable cash dispensing machine, it changed the daily rhythm of personal finance, making access to one's own money a simple, self-service operation available at any hour. A person stands in the quiet vestibule of a bank late at night. The only sound is the gentle hum of the ATM and the soft whirring as it counts and dispenses a small amount of cash. This simple, solitary interaction is a routine part of modern life. A quiet moment of self-reliance made possible by a machine that connected the individual directly and securely to their own digital account. The shift to electronic payments with credit cards and ATMs was just the visible surface of a much deeper transformation happening within the banking system itself. For centuries, the core of a bank's operations had been the physical ledger, a heavy, leather-bound book filled with neat, handwritten entries of debits and credits. In the late 20th century, this physical object was gradually and quietly replaced by its digital equivalent, the electronic database. This was the birth of the digital ledger. The fundamental principles were exactly the same as the double-entry bookkeeping perfected by the Renaissance merchants. Every transaction still had two equal and opposite effects. But instead of being recorded with a quill pen on a paper page, these entries were now recorded as bits of data on a magnetic disk, stored in the climate-controlled server rooms of a bank's data center. This transition from paper to pixels had a profound effect on the speed, scale, and efficiency of banking. A transaction that once required a clerk to physically find a ledger and make a manual entry could now be processed by a computer in a fraction of a second. This allowed a single bank to manage millions of customer accounts and to process a vast volume of transactions every single day, something that would have required an army of clerks in the age of paper. This digital foundation made modern global banking possible. When a person in Tokyo uses their credit card to buy a product from a website based in Ireland, a complex but incredibly fast chain of digital messages is set in motion. The request for payment travels from the Irish merchant's bank through a global payment network like Visa or MasterCard to the customer's bank in Japan. The Japanese bank's computer checks the digital ledger for that customer's account, confirms the funds are available, and sends an approval message back along the same path. The entire round trip, spanning half the globe, takes place in the quiet space of a few seconds. At the end of the day, these millions of cross-border transactions are settled between the banks themselves through large, centralized electronic systems. Institutions like SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, provide a secure and standardized messaging network for banks all over the world to communicate with each other. A bank in Germany can send a quiet, encrypted digital message to a bank in Brazil, instructing it to transfer a large sum of money between two of their corporate clients. Via Money itself is simply a debit entry in one digital ledger and a corresponding credit entry in another. The world of high finance was similarly transformed. The trading of stocks, bonds, and currencies, which once took place in noisy, crowded physical exchanges, moved on to silent, global electronic networks. A trader at a desk in London could now buy a block of shares listed on the New York Stock Exchange with a few simple keystrokes, the order executed and recorded electronically in near real time. In this way, the digital ledger became the unseen and quiet engine of the modern financial system. It was a transition from physical tokens and paper records to a world where money is, for the most part, a silent, secure, and instantaneous flow of information. In a large, cool, and quiet room, rows upon rows of computer servers stand in neat racks. The only sounds are the gentle hum of cooling fans and the rhythmic blinking of small green and amber lights. These lights are the visible signs of a ceaseless and visible activity, the processing and recording of millions of transactions, the silent beating heart of a global digital ledger. Our long journey through the history of money, banking, and trade has been a quiet one, following a path of slow and steady evolution. From the granaries of ancient Sumer to the silent, blinking lights of a modern data center, the outward forms have changed almost beyond recognition. Yet, at the heart of this story, the fundamental ideas have remained remarkably constant. It has always been a simple human search for better tools to facilitate trust, to measure value, and to make the act of exchange a calm and orderly process. We began with things that had their own intrinsic worth: barley, salt, and shells. Then came the great innovation of coinage, the creation of small, standardized discs of metal, whose value was guaranteed by the stamp of a king or an emperor. For thousands of years, the solid physical reality of gold and silver was the anchor of economic life. The Byzantine solidus, the Venetian ducat, the Spanish piece of 8, these were objects of universal trust, a common language of commerce that connected distant cultures in a quiet, predictable rhythm. Then, a gradual and profound shift began. The idea of money started to separate from its physical form. The goldsmith's receipt, the bill of exchange, and the banker's promissory note were all simple pieces of paper. Their value lay not in the paper itself, but in the promise they represented, a promise to pay a certain amount of real metal on demand. This was a slow transition towards abstraction, a move built entirely on the careful cultivation of reputation and trust. In the modern era, this journey reached its logical conclusion with the rise of purely fiat currencies. The money we use today, the paper notes in our wallets, and, more often, the digital numbers in our bank accounts, is no longer a claim on a physical commodity. It is a shared social convention, an intricate system of symbols whose value is sustained by our collective faith in the institutions that manage it, and in the stability of the economies they represent. The search for a stable measure of value, once found in the unchanging nature of gold, is now the quiet, continuous work of our central banks. Through all these transformations, the tools of accounting have been the silent partners to money. The double-entry ledger, perfected in Renaissance Italy, brought a new level of order and clarity to the world of commerce. Today, that same elegant, balanced logic lives on in the digital ledgers that process billions of transactions in the blink of an eye. The form has changed from ink on parchment to light in a fiber optic cable, but the essential principle of a clear and honest record remains the same. So we see that the history of money is a story of quiet, human ingenuity. It is a continuous, gradual effort to create systems of order, predictability, and trust, allowing us to cooperate and exchange the fruits of our labor in a peaceful and organized way. The world of global finance now rests. The great electronic ledgers are quiet. Their daily work of balancing and settling is done. In the deep stillness, the vast and complex system that connects us all is in a state of quiet equilibrium, a silent, orderly network of trust, waiting for the calm and predictable rhythm of a new day to begin.